What happens when a billionaire CEO gets stood up on Christmas Eve in the same restaurant where a widowed father is trying to hold his broken family together? What neither of them knows is that two 7-year-old girls are about to change everything. This is a story about loneliness, second chances, and the kind of love that doesn't ask for permission. It simply arrives when you need it most. Stay with me until the end, hit that like button, and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. Now, let me take you back to that Christmas Eve. The snow had started falling around 4 o'clock that afternoon, the kind of soft, persistent snow that turns city streets into something almost magical. By the time Ethan Cole pushed through the heavy wooden door of Marcello's Italian restaurant, his daughter's mittened hands clasped firmly in his own, the sidewalks of downtown Boston had transformed into a winter postcard. The warm air inside hit them immediately, a wall of garlic, fresh bread, and the low murmur of holiday conversations. "Daddy, it smells like heaven," Maya announced, her 7-year-old voice cutting through the gentle din of the restaurant. "Heaven smells like garlic bread?" her twin sister Lily questioned, already tugging off her purple knit hat, releasing a cascade of dark curls identical to her sister's. Ethan smiled despite the familiar ache in his chest, the one that never quite went away, especially not during the holidays. "Heaven probably smells like whatever makes you happiest," he said softly, helping them out of their coats. The hostess, a young woman named Maria, who had seated them every Christmas Eve for the past 3 years, greeted them with genuine warmth. "The Cole family, right on time. Your usual table?" "Please," Ethan nodded, grateful for the consistency. In a world that had shifted beneath his feet like unstable ground, these small traditions were the handrails he clung to. As Maria guided them through the restaurant, Ethan's eyes swept the space with the practiced vigilance of a single parent. He counted exits out of habit from his days as a structural engineer, assessed the proximity of other diners, noted where the restrooms were located. But it was something else that made him pause mid-step. Near the far window, in a pool of soft lamplight, sat a woman alone. She was perhaps in her mid-30s, dressed in what Ethan's limited fashion knowledge could only describe as expensive simplicity, a cream-colored sweater that probably cost more than his monthly grocery budget, paired with dark slacks and understated jewelry that caught the light when she moved. Her dark hair was pulled back in a way that seemed effortless, but probably wasn't. She held a wine glass in slender fingers, barely touched, and stared out at the falling snow with an expression that Ethan recognized immediately. It was the look of someone trying very hard not to cry in public. "Daddy, you're squishing my hand," Lily whispered, and Ethan realized he'd stopped walking entirely, still staring at the stranger by the window. "Sorry, sweetie," he murmured, forcing his attention back to his daughters as they reached their booth, a cozy corner spot with red leather seats and a small candle flickering in a glass holder. The girls scrambled in to one side, immediately beginning their usual ritual of rearranging the table settings and arguing over who got which crayon from the children's activity pack Maria had thoughtfully provided. Ethan slid into the opposite seat, positioning himself so he could see both his daughters, and if he was honest with himself, the woman by the window. He shouldn't be looking. It was none of his business. Boston was full of people spending Christmas Eve alone, and each of them had their reasons. Maybe she preferred it that way. Maybe she was waiting for someone. Maybe... "She's sad," Maya said suddenly, not even looking up from the picture of a reindeer she was coloring with fierce determination. Ethan's attention snapped back to his daughter. "What?" "The pretty lady by the window," Maya continued, switching from brown to red crayon with the serious focus of a master artist. "She's sad, like you get sometimes when you think we're asleep." The observation landed like a gentle punch to Ethan's sternum. He exchanged a quick glance with Lily, who had stopped coloring entirely and was now studying the woman with the unblinking intensity that twins seemed to share. "We shouldn't stare at people, girls," Ethan said quietly, though he was guilty of the same thing. "And we definitely shouldn't make assumptions about how they're feeling." "But she is sad," Lily insisted, her voice carrying more conviction than any 7-year-old should possess. "Look at how she's sitting, and she keeps checking her phone but then putting it down like it hurt her feelings." Ethan did look. And damn it, Lily was right. The woman would glance at her phone. Her expression would flicker with something. Disappointment? Anger? and then she'd set it face down on the table as if the device had personally betrayed her. Maybe her friend is running late, Ethan suggested, though even as he said it, he knew better. He'd seen that particular brand of disappointment before, in the mirror, on the faces of well-meaning friends who'd tried to set him up on dates he'd canceled at the last minute. This was the look of someone who'd been stood up, on Christmas Eve, at one of the nicest restaurants in Boston. The bastard. "Order whatever you want tonight," Ethan told his daughters, pushing away thoughts of the stranger situation. "It's Christmas Eve. We're celebrating." "Celebrating what?" Maya asked, practical as always. Ethan hesitated. "Celebrating that we survived another year? Celebrating that your mother gave her life to bring you into this world, and I'm still trying to figure out how to honor that sacrifice? Celebrating that I haven't completely screwed up this parenting thing yet?" "Celebrating us," he finally said. "Celebrating that we're together, that we're healthy, that we have each other. That's more than enough reason." The girls seemed satisfied with this answer, returning to their crayons and their excited chatter about what they hoped Santa would bring. Ethan picked up his menu, though he already knew what he'd order, the same thing he'd ordered every Christmas Eve since Sarah had died. Chicken parmesan. Her favorite. It was a small act of remembrance, a private memorial that no one else understood. Sarah had loved this restaurant, had insisted they come here on their first wedding anniversary, despite Ethan's protest that it was too expensive. She'd ordered the chicken parmesan and had closed her eyes with that first bite, making a sound of pure contentment that had made Ethan fall in love with her all over again. "I'm going to marry this chicken," she'd declared, and Ethan had laughed so hard that the couple at the next table had given them annoyed looks. 6 years later, she was gone, and Ethan sat in the same restaurant with the daughters she'd never gotten to see grow up, ordering the same meal like some kind of culinary seance. Their waiter, an older gentleman named Vincent, who'd been at Marcello's for at least 2 decades, approached with the kind of gentle smile that suggested he remembered them from previous years. "Good evening, Cole family," he said warmly. "The usual to start? Bruschetta for the table and chocolate milk for the young ladies?" "Yes, please," Ethan confirmed. And he was interrupted by a sound from across the restaurant, not loud, but distinct enough to cut through the ambient noise. The woman by the window had put her phone down rather forcefully, the sharp click of glass on wood carrying in the momentary lull of conversation. When Ethan looked over, he saw her pressing the back of her hand against her eyes, her shoulders rigid with the effort of maintaining composure. Without warning, Maya slid out of the booth. "Maya, sit down," Ethan said immediately, recognizing the determined set of his daughter's jaw. It was the same expression she got right before she did something that would either be incredibly sweet or incredibly mortifying. "I'll be right back," Maya announced, already moving. Maya Catherine Cole, but she was gone, weaving between tables with the confidence of someone who'd never been taught to fear rejection. Ethan started to rise, ready to intercept his daughter before she bothered a stranger who clearly wanted to be left alone. But Lily grabbed his wrist. "Wait," Lily said softly. "Just wait, Daddy." So Ethan waited, his heart hammering with parental anxiety, and watched his daughter approach one of the wealthiest women in America, though he had no idea of that yet. Isabella Grant had been checking her phone obsessively for the past 47 minutes, which was approximately 46 minutes longer than she typically waited for anything or anyone. The fact that she was still sitting here, nursing a glass of Chianti she hadn't really wanted, in a restaurant where she'd agreed to meet a man whose last name she couldn't even remember, was a testament to just how desperately lonely she'd become. Pathetic. That's what this was. Pathetic. Martin? Marcus? Matthew? Something with an M. Her assistant had set up the date. He's a professor at MIT, Isabella. Very intelligent, age-appropriate, and he specifically requested a low-key venue. And Isabella had agreed because it was either this or spend Christmas Eve in her Beacon Hill townhouse with a bottle of wine and her laptop, reviewing Q4 projections. Again. For the 3rd year in a row. At 5:47 p.m., he'd texted, "Running a bit behind, be there soon." At 6:15 p.m., "Traffic is terrible, so sorry." At 6:42 p.m., "I don't think this is going to work out. You seem lovely, but I'm not ready for this level of intensity. Best wishes." Level of intensity. She'd laughed at that, a bitter sound that had drawn looks from the couple at the next table. She hadn't even met the man yet. and he'd already decided she was too intense. What did that even mean? That he'd Googled her and realized she was the CEO of Grant Industries, a privately held conglomerate worth $4.2 billion? That she'd built her company from nothing after her own family had written her off as too ambitious, too driven, too unwilling to accept her proper place, too intense. She should leave. There was no reason to stay here, surrounded by happy families and romantic couples, a living monument to her own spectacular failure at the one thing money couldn't buy: human connection. Isabella reached for her phone one more time, ready to call her driver, when a small voice beside her said, "Excuse me, miss?" She looked down and found herself staring at a little girl with dark curls and eyes the color of honey, wearing a red velvet dress that had clearly been chosen with care. The child couldn't have been more than 7 or 8, and she was looking at Isabella with an expression of such genuine concern that Isabella felt something crack in her carefully maintained composure. "Yes?" Isabella managed, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "Are you okay?" the little girl asked. "You look really sad, and it's Christmas Eve. And nobody should be sad on Christmas Eve." Isabella opened her mouth to deliver the polite brush-off she'd perfected over years of unwanted conversations, but what came out instead was, I'm fine, sweetheart. Thank you for asking." "You don't look fine," the girl observed with the brutal honesty of childhood. "You look like you're about to cry. Are you waiting for someone who didn't come?" Jesus. When had children become so perceptive? "Maya!" a male voice called from across the restaurant, sharp with embarrassment. "Come back here right now." Isabella looked up and saw a man rising from a booth in the corner, tall, maybe 6'1", with dark hair that needed a trim and wearing a sweater that looked warm but well worn. He was moving toward them with the purposeful stride of a parent about to apologize profusely for their child's behavior, but the little girl, Maya, seemed completely unconcerned. "It's okay, Daddy," Maya called back. "I'm just checking on her." "I'm so sorry," the man said as he reached them, and Isabella got her first good look at Ethan Cole, though she didn't know his name yet. He had the kind of face that wore exhaustion like a second skin, handsome but tired, with shadows under eyes that were a striking shade of blue-green. There was a small scar on his chin and laugh lines around his mouth that suggested he'd once smiled more easily. "She didn't mean to bother you. Maya, we talked about this. You can't just—" "She's not bothering me," Isabella heard herself say, surprising both the man and herself. She looked back at Maya, who was still watching her with that unnerving intensity. "I'm okay, really, but that's very sweet of you to check." "Are you eating alone?" Maya pressed, and Isabella saw the man, her father, close his eyes briefly, as if praying for patience. Maya, "Yes," Isabella answered, because what was the point in lying? "I am." "On Christmas Eve?" Another voice chimed in, and Isabella saw a second little girl approaching, identical to the first, down to the red velvet dress and honey-colored eyes. Twins. That's terrible. "Lily, Maya, back to the table, now." The father's voice had taken on the firm tone of someone who'd reached the end of their parenting rope, but there was something gentle underneath it. He looked at Isabella with an expression that was part apology, part something else. Recognition, maybe? "I'm really sorry. They're usually better behaved than this. They're fine," Isabella said, and meant it. There was something refreshing about their directness, their unfiltered concern. In her world, people performed concern. These children actually felt it. "Really? Do you want to eat with us?" Maya asked, and Isabella felt her carefully constructed walls take another hit. "Oh no, I couldn't—" "Maya, that's enough," the father said firmly but not unkindly. He crouched down to his daughter's level, and Isabella noticed the way he positioned himself, unconsciously protective. "What have we talked about regarding personal boundaries?" "That everyone has them, and we should respect them," the girls chanted in unison, clearly having heard this lecture before. "Right. So we're going to go back to our table, let this nice lady enjoy her evening, and—" "But she's all alone," Lily protested. "And you always say that nobody should be alone on Christmas if they don't want to be." The man's jaw tightened slightly, and Isabella realized with sudden clarity that this was a man who lived by his own rules, who'd probably said exactly that to his daughters, and was now being held accountable by two 7-year-olds with better moral compasses than most adults. "That's different," he said quietly. "How?" Maya challenged. "Because—" He stopped, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration. Then he stood, turning to Isabella with an expression that suggested he was about to do something he'd regret. "Look, I'm sorry about this. They mean well. We come here every Christmas Eve, and it's usually just the three of us. And they've apparently decided to expand our party this year without consulting me." Isabella should say no. She should thank them politely, claim she was waiting for someone, protect her pride and her privacy, and all the other things that successful people were supposed to protect. Instead, she found herself looking at this tired father and his persistent daughters and feeling something she hadn't felt in months, a genuine desire to be around other people. "I wouldn't want to intrude," Isabella said carefully, giving him an out. "You wouldn't be," Lily said immediately. "Right, Daddy?" Ethan Cole looked at Isabella for a long moment, and in that look she saw understanding. He knew what it was like to be alone in a crowded room. He knew what it was like to put on a brave face while something inside you slowly broke apart. "If you'd like to join us," he said slowly, "you'd be welcome. But please don't feel obligated. My daughters are enthusiastic, but they'll survive the disappointment if you'd prefer to eat alone." Would she prefer that? Isabella genuinely didn't know anymore. "Are you sure?" she asked, hating how uncertain she sounded. Isabella Grant did not do uncertain. Isabella Grant made billion-dollar decisions without hesitation. But this, sitting with strangers, accepting kindness from people who owed her nothing, this was unfamiliar territory. "I'm sure," Ethan said, and something in his voice suggested he understood exactly how much courage it took to say yes to an unexpected invitation. "Come on. Vincent will be thrilled to have another order to take." Isabella found herself standing, gathering her wine glass and purse, following this man and his daughters back to their corner booth, while other diners watched with curiosity. She felt exposed, vulnerable in a way that had nothing to do with business deals or board meetings. "I'm Isabella," she said as they reached the table, sliding into the booth beside Maya, while Lily bounced back to her father's side. "Ethan Cole," he replied, settling back into his seat. "And you've already met Maya and Lily, who apparently have no sense of social appropriateness." "We have lots of social appropriateness," Maya protested. "We just saw someone who needed help." "I'm not sure I needed help," Isabella said gently, though even as she said it, she knew it was a lie. "Everyone needs help sometimes," Lily said with the wisdom of someone 3 times her age. "That's what Daddy says. He says there's no shame in needing people, only in pretending you don't." Ethan shifted uncomfortably, clearly not enjoying having his own words quoted back at him. "I also say that it's polite to let people eat their dinner in peace." "We're eating in peace," Maya pointed out. "Just together." Vincent appeared then, his professional demeanor barely concealing his surprise at the changed seating arrangement. "Ms. Grant," he said, and Isabella saw Ethan's eyebrows rise slightly. Vincent had recognized her. Of course he had. "Will you be joining the Cole family this evening?" "It appears so," Isabella said, managing a smile. "Could you move my wine over, and I'll have the special, please?" "Excellent choice. And for you, Mr. Cole? The usual?" "Yes, thanks," Ethan said, his tone suggesting he was still processing the fact that Vincent knew this woman's name. "And whatever the girls want." "Spaghetti!" the twins chorused, and Vincent nodded with a smile before retreating. An awkward silence descended over the table, the kind that happens when strangers who've agreed to share a meal suddenly realize they have no idea what to talk about. Isabella folded her hands in her lap, suddenly hyper-aware of everything. The cost of her clothes compared to theirs, the professional manicure on her nails versus Ethan's work-roughened hands, the vast gulf between her world and whatever world this small family occupied. "So," Ethan started, then stopped, started again. "You come here often." Isabella nearly laughed. "That's your opening line?" He had the grace to look embarrassed. "I haven't made conversation with anyone over 3 feet tall in about 6 months. I'm rusty." "Daddy talks to Uncle Mike all the time," Lily corrected, "and he's really tall." "Uncle Mike doesn't count," Ethan said. "He finishes my sentences for me. That's not conversation. That's mind reading. Actually, I don't come here often, Isabella said, deciding to throw him a lifeline. A friend recommended it, said it was cozy. It is cozy, Maya agreed, and the breadsticks are the best in the whole world. The whole world? Isabella asked, matching the little girl's serious tone. That's quite a claim. We've had breadsticks at 7 different restaurants, Lily said. These ones are definitely the best. A proper scientific study, Isabella observed. Sample size might be small, but the methodology is sound. Ethan laughed, a real laugh, short but genuine, and Isabella was startled by how it transformed his face. The exhaustion lifted for just a moment, and she caught a glimpse of who he might have been before whatever had happened to put those shadows in his eyes. Are you a scientist? Maya asked, leaning forward with interest. Not exactly, Isabella said. I run a company, several companies, actually. Like a boss? Lily's eyes widened. Exactly like a boss. Are you the biggest boss, or are there bigger bosses than you? Lily, Ethan warned, but Isabella waved him off. I'm the biggest boss, she said simply. At my company, anyway. That's so cool, Maya breathed. What kind of company? How to explain Grant Industries to a 7-year-old? We make lots of different things. Some of the parts that go into computers, medical equipment, materials for building houses. A bit of everything, really. Do you build stuff? Lily asked. I used to, Isabella said, surprised by the memory. When I was younger, I'd take apart electronics just to see how they worked. Drove my mother crazy because I could never quite get them back together properly. Daddy builds stuff, Maya announced. He's an engineer. He draws buildings on the computer and makes sure they don't fall down. Structural engineering, Ethan clarified, looking slightly uncomfortable with his daughter's oversimplification. Though I do less actual building these days, more consulting and safety assessments. That sounds important, Isabella said, and meant it. It pays the bills, Ethan replied with a shrug. Keeps these two in breadsticks and Christmas presents. There was something in his tone, not quite defensive, but self-deprecating in a way that suggested he felt the need to minimize his accomplishments. Isabella recognized it because she'd heard it in her own voice years ago, before she'd learned to own her success without apology. Vincent returned with their appetizers, bruschetta for the table, and the breadsticks that had been so highly praised. The girls immediately grabbed for them, and Isabella found herself doing the same, suddenly ravenous in a way that had nothing to do with food and everything to do with the unexpected warmth of this moment. Oh my God, she said after her first bite. They weren't kidding. These are incredible. Told you, Maya said triumphantly. They ate in more comfortable silence for a few minutes, and Isabella found herself observing the family dynamics with the same analytical mind she brought to business. The way Ethan automatically cut Lily's bruschetta into smaller pieces without being asked. The way the twins communicated in that eerie shorthand that twins seem to have, passing crayons and sharing breadsticks with an unspoken system of fairness. The way Ethan's eyes constantly tracked his daughters, even when he was looking elsewhere. A hypervigilance that spoke of single parenting or something worse. Can I ask you something? Lily said suddenly, fixing Isabella with those unsettling honey-colored eyes. Lily, Ethan started, but Isabella interrupted. Of course. Were you crying before? When you were sitting alone? The table went quiet. Even Maya stopped mid-reach for another breadstick, sensing the weight of the question. Isabella could lie. Should lie, probably. But there was something about these children, about this moment, that demanded honesty. Yes, she said simply. I was. Why? Lily asked, and there was no judgment in the question, only genuine curiosity. Lily, that's private, Ethan said firmly. You don't ask people why they're crying. But how else will we know? Maya protested. Some things aren't ours to know, Ethan said, and Isabella heard the weight of experience behind those words. It's okay, Isabella said quietly. She set down her wine glass and looked at the two small faces watching her with such open concern. I was supposed to meet someone here tonight, someone I'd never met before. Date. Like a boyfriend date? Maya asked. Potentially, but he didn't show up. He texted me to say he'd changed his mind. That's mean, Lily said with the absolute moral clarity of childhood. That's extremely mean, Maya agreed. You're really pretty and nice, and he doesn't even know you. He's dumb. Despite everything, Isabella felt herself smile. Thank you, that's very sweet. She's right, though, Ethan said quietly, and when Isabella looked at him, she found him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. That was a coward's move. If he'd changed his mind, he should have had the decency to tell you in person, or at least call. Maybe he was intimidated, Isabella said, though she wasn't sure why she was defending a man who'd humiliated her. Then he was definitely dumb, Ethan said flatly. Intimidation is just fear dressed up as an excuse. They looked at each other across the table, and something passed between them. An understanding, perhaps. A recognition of shared experience with disappointment and the various ways people let you down. Have you ever been stood up, Daddy? Maya asked. Ethan's expression shifted, became more guarded. Not exactly, but I've had people cancel plans at the last minute. It's not fun. Because of Mommy? Lily asked quietly. The temperature at the table seemed to drop 10 degrees. Ethan went very still, his hand frozen halfway to his water glass. The twins watched their father with the careful attention of children who'd learned to read their parents' moods for signs of emotional weather. We don't have to talk about that, Ethan said, his voice carefully neutral. It's okay to talk about Mommy, Maya said gently, and Isabella felt her heart break a little at the reversal of roles, this child comforting her father. I know it is, sweetheart, Ethan said, but maybe not tonight. Maybe we just enjoy our dinner and our new friend, and it's fine, Isabella interrupted softly. Really, if you need to talk about something, don't stop on my account. Ethan looked at her for a long moment, and Isabella saw him making calculations. How much to share, how much to protect, how much this stranger could handle. Their mother passed away, he finally said, his voice flat in the way that people's voices got when they were discussing the worst thing that had ever happened to them. 7 years ago, complications during childbirth. The girls never met her. The words landed like stones in still water, and Isabella felt their weight. I'm so sorry, she said, and meant it. It's okay, Lily said matter-of-factly. We don't remember her, but Daddy tells us stories. She sounded really nice. She was, Ethan said, his voice softening. She was extraordinary. Do you miss her? Maya asked Isabella suddenly. Maya, what? Ethan started, confused. Not her mommy, Maya clarified. I mean, does Ms. Isabella miss having someone? Is that why she was on a date? Out of the mouths of babes, Isabella thought. This child had just diagnosed her entire problem with surgical precision. Yes, Isabella admitted. I do miss having someone. I work a lot, and I'm good at my job, but when I come home, the house is very quiet. Our house is never quiet, Lily said. Maya talks in her sleep and Daddy snores, and I do not snore, Ethan protested. You totally do, both girls said in unison, and despite the heavy turn the conversation had taken, they all laughed. Vincent appeared with their main courses, and the conversation shifted to lighter topics as they ate. Isabella learned that Maya wanted to be a veterinarian when she grew up, while Lily was torn between astronaut and professional soccer player. She learned that Ethan coached their soccer team despite having, in his words, absolutely no athletic ability whatsoever. She learned that they lived in Dorchester, that the girls attended St. Mary's Elementary, that Ethan's best friend Mike was apparently terrible at poker but kept playing anyway. In return, she told them carefully curated pieces of her own life, that she'd grown up in Connecticut, that she'd started her first business at 23 with money she'd borrowed from a friend because her own family wouldn't invest in her, that she'd bought this friend a house 5 years later as a thank you. She told them about her office with its view of Boston Harbor, about the time she'd given a presentation to 200 people with her blouse on inside out. The twins found this hilarious. About her terrible attempts at gardening that had resulted in somehow killing a cactus. She didn't tell them about the loneliness that sometimes felt like drowning. About the way success had become both her greatest achievement and her most isolating characteristic. About the fact that she was 36 years old and had never been in a relationship that lasted more than 8 months, because the men she met either wanted her money or were threatened by it. She didn't tell them that sitting here, in this modest Italian restaurant with this tired father and his precocious daughters, she felt more at home than she had in years. Tell us about the dumbest business mistake you ever made, Maya demanded as they waited for dessert. Maya, you can't just... It's fine, Isabella said, waving off Ethan's protest. She was getting used to their directness. Finding it refreshing, even. Let's see. Dumbest mistake. There was the time I invested $2 million in a company that turned out to be running a pyramid scheme. The girls gasped, though Isabella suspected they had no idea what a pyramid scheme was. $2 million? Lily breathed. $2 million, Isabella confirmed. Lost every penny, learned a valuable lesson about due diligence. What's due diligence? Maya asked. It means doing your homework before you make big decisions, Isabella explained. Making sure you understand what you're getting into. Like how Daddy makes us research our book reports before we write them? Lily asked. Exactly like that. Did you get in trouble? Maya asked. When you lost all that money? I got in trouble with myself, Isabella said. I was the only boss, remember? So I could only be mad at me. That's sad, Lily observed. When we mess up, at least we get to blame each other. Hey, Ethan protested. You're supposed to take responsibility for your own actions. We do, Maya said seriously. But first we blame Lily. Only because you blame me first. They dissolved into the kind of twin bickering that spoke of deep affection beneath the surface squabbling, and Isabella found herself watching Ethan watch his daughters with an expression of such profound love that it physically hurt to witness. This was what she didn't have. Not the money or the success or the corner office. She had all of that. This unguarded affection, this sense of belonging to people who knew your worst qualities and loved you anyway. Are you okay? Ethan asked quietly, and Isabella realized she'd been staring. Yes, she said. This is nice. Thank you for letting me crash your family dinner. Thank the girls, Ethan said with a wry smile. They're the ones who kidnapped you. We didn't kidnap her, Maya protested. We rescued her. From what? Ethan asked. From being alone on Christmas Eve, Lily said, as if this were obvious. Nobody should be alone on Christmas Eve. Isabella felt something hot press behind her eyes and looked away quickly, pretending to study her wine glass with great interest. When she looked back, she found Ethan watching her with an expression of such gentle understanding that it nearly undid her completely. No, he said softly, addressing his daughters but keeping his eyes on Isabella. Nobody should be alone on Christmas Eve. Their desserts arrived, tiramisu for the table, and the twins attacked it with the enthusiasm of children who'd been remarkably well-behaved for nearly 2 hours and felt they'd earned a reward. Isabella picked at her portion, suddenly aware of how late it was getting, how this strange, wonderful interlude would have to end soon. Do you have plans tomorrow? Lily asked suddenly. For Christmas? Lily, Ethan said, his warning tone back. I was just asking, Isabella smiled. I have work, actually. There's always something that needs attention. On Christmas? Both twins looked horrified. I'm not very good at holidays, Isabella admitted. I don't really have family nearby, and most of my friends have their own plans, so I usually just catch up on projects. The girls looked at their father with identical expressions of determination, and Isabella watched Ethan's face shift through several emotions: surprise, hesitation, concern, and then something that might have been resignation or might have been hope. Don't, he started. You should come to our house for Christmas, Maya announced. Girls, that's not... We make pancakes in the morning, Lily added, and we open presents and watch movies, and Uncle Mike comes over and burns the ham. I do not burn the ham, Ethan protested. Mike burns the ham. I've asked him to stop helping, but he insists. You should come, Maya repeated, looking at Isabella with such earnest hope that Isabella felt her carefully constructed walls crumble a bit more. That's very sweet, Isabella said carefully, but I'm sure your father would rather have Christmas with just his family. You'd be welcome, Ethan interrupted quietly, and when Isabella looked at him in surprise, he shrugged. I mean it. If you don't have other plans, and if you don't mind chaos and burned ham and 2 kids who wake up at 5 in the morning regardless of how many times I explain the concept of sleeping in, you'd be welcome. Isabella opened her mouth to decline, because that's what people did, right? They declined charity invitations from people they'd just met. They protected their pride, they maintained appropriate boundaries. But then she looked at this small family who'd taken her in without hesitation, who'd fed her and made her laugh, and reminded her what human connection felt like, and she found herself saying something different. "What time should I be there?" The girls cheered, and Ethan smiled, a real smile this time, reaching his eyes, transforming his whole face. And Isabella realized she'd just agreed to spend Christmas Day with complete strangers, and for the first time in years she was actually looking forward to Christmas. They exchanged phone numbers, Ethan's fingers fumbling with his outdated phone, while Isabella's smartwatch synced automatically, and made plans for Isabella to arrive around 9 the next morning. Vincent brought the check, and there was an awkward moment when both Ethan and Isabella reached for it. "I've got it," Ethan said firmly. "Don't be ridiculous," Isabella replied. "Let me—" "You're our guest," Ethan insisted. "Besides, I invited you. Sort of. The girls invited you. Either way, I'm paying." "I probably make more in an hour than this entire meal costs," Isabella said, then immediately regretted her bluntness. But Ethan just raised an eyebrow. "Then you can definitely afford to let me maintain my dignity and buy you dinner." They stared at each other across the table, and Isabella realized this was some kind of test. Not of finances or power, but of something more fundamental. Could she let someone do something for her without needing to control it? Could she accept kindness without immediately trying to repay it? "Okay," she said finally, sitting back. "Thank you for dinner." "You're welcome," Ethan said, and something in his expression suggested she'd passed whatever test he'd been giving. They gathered their things, the girls bundling back into coats and hats while Isabella slipped on her cashmere jacket, tasteful, expensive, and suddenly feeling ridiculous compared to their practical winter wear. Outside, the snow was still falling, coating the city in white, muffling the usual urban noise into something almost peaceful. "Do you need a ride?" Ethan asked. "We're parked just around the corner." "I have a car," Isabella said, then stopped. Her driver was waiting 3 blocks away, in a Tesla that probably cost more than Ethan made in a year. "Actually, I'll walk. I like the snow." It was partially true. She did like the snow. But mostly, she didn't want them to see the car, didn't want to highlight the vast economic difference between their worlds more than she already had. "Okay," Ethan said, and if he suspected her reasoning, he didn't comment. "We'll see you tomorrow morning. You have the address?" 9 o'clock, Isabella confirmed. "I'll be there." "Bring your appetite," Lily advised seriously. "Daddy makes enough food to feed an army." "I always hope some of it will actually be edible," Ethan said dryly. "Hope springs eternal." The girls hugged Isabella goodbye, quick, fierce hugs that squeezed something in her chest, and then they were walking away, 3 figures in the falling snow, Ethan's hands on his daughter's shoulders, guiding them carefully down the slippery sidewalk. Isabella stood there watching until they turned the corner and disappeared from sight. Then she pulled out her phone and called her driver. "Ms. Grant, I'll be there in 3 minutes." "Take your time," Isabella said, still staring at the spot where the Cole family had vanished. "I'm not in a rush." When she finally slid into the back seat of her car, her driver, Marcus, who'd worked for her for 5 years, gave her an odd look in the rearview mirror. "Good evening, ma'am." "Actually," Isabella said, surprising herself. "Yes, it really was." As the car pulled away from Marcello's, Isabella caught her reflection in the window. And for the first time in months, the woman looking back at her didn't look quite so alone. She had no idea that the man who'd bought her dinner lived paycheck to paycheck. No idea that his house in Dorchester was mortgaged to the hilt, or that he stayed up nights worrying about college funds and retirement savings. No idea that he'd worn his best sweater tonight, the one without any stains or stretched out sleeves. And Ethan had no idea that the woman his daughters had adopted was worth more than everyone in that restaurant combined. No idea that she lived in a 5-story townhouse in Beacon Hill with more square footage than his entire neighborhood. No idea that she'd once been featured on the cover of Forbes as one of America's most powerful self-made billionaires. All they knew, in that moment, was that 2 lonely people had found an unexpected connection over breadsticks and bruschetta. And sometimes, that's all you really need to know. As Isabella's car merged onto the highway, heading toward her empty townhouse and her waiting laptop, she found herself doing something she hadn't done in years. She was looking forward to tomorrow, not because of work, not because of obligation, but because somewhere in Dorchester, two little girls with honey-colored eyes were probably already planning what they'd show her, and a tired father was probably wondering what the hell he'd just gotten himself into. And for the first time since her blind date had sent that cowardly text, Isabella Grant was smiling. Really, truly smiling. Because sometimes the best things in life happen when you let two 7-year-olds make decisions for you. And sometimes the loneliest Christmas Eve can turn into the beginning of something you never knew you needed. She just didn't know it yet. Neither of them did. But they would. Isabella's alarm went off at 6:30 a.m. on Christmas morning, which was exactly 3 hours later than the twins had predicted and 2 hours earlier than she'd normally wake up on a holiday. She lay in her king-sized bed, staring at the coffered ceiling of her master bedroom, and seriously considered canceling. It wasn't too late. She could send a text, claim she'd come down with something, apologize profusely. Ethan would understand. He'd probably even be relieved. What kind of person invites a stranger to Christmas dinner after knowing them for 2 hours? What kind of person accepts such an invitation? Desperate people, that's who. Isabella threw off her silk duvet and padded across heated marble floors to her walk-in closet, where she stood for 20 minutes trying to decide what one wore to a working-class Christmas in Dorchester. Everything she owned suddenly seemed too expensive, too obvious, too much. The cashmere sweaters still had their designer labels visible. Her jeans cost $400 and looked like they cost $400. Even her casual clothes screamed money in a way she'd never noticed before. She finally settled on dark jeans, the least expensive pair she owned, purchased 3 years ago and rarely worn, and a simple navy sweater that she'd gotten as a corporate gift from some vendor and had shoved to the back of her closet. She paired them with boots that were designer but at least didn't announce themselves as such, and studied herself in the full-length mirror. Still too polished. Still too perfect. Still Isabella Grant, CEO, even when she was trying not to be. Her phone buzzed with a text from her assistant, Sarah, who apparently also didn't take holidays off. Merry Christmas. Board packet for January meeting is ready for your review. Also, the Malaysia deal is heating up. Chen wants to talk after New Year. Isabella stared at the message, then typed back, "Thanks. Reviewing Monday. Enjoy your holiday." Sarah's response was immediate. "You too. Are you actually doing something fun today, or should I expect track changes by noon?" Isabella hesitated, then typed, "Actually doing something fun. Don't faint. Who are you, and what have you done with my boss?" Isabella smiled despite herself and pocketed her phone. She'd brought gifts. Of course she'd brought gifts. Showing up empty-handed was unthinkable, but had agonized over them until midnight. Too expensive would be insulting. Too cheap would seem thoughtless. She'd finally settled on a chemistry set for the twins, because Maya had mentioned wanting to be a scientist, and a nice bottle of scotch for Ethan that was good, but not so good that he'd feel uncomfortable accepting it. Her driver, a different one today, because Marcus had the day off, was waiting outside at 8:45 a.m. "Address, Ms. Grant?" She gave him the street in Dorchester, watched his eyebrows rise slightly in the rearview mirror, and said nothing. The drive took 30 minutes through quiet Christmas morning streets, past houses decorated with lights and inflatable Santas, past the gradually shifting landscape from wealthy to comfortable to struggling. Isabella watched the neighborhoods change through tinted windows and felt her anxiety rising with each mile. What was she doing? This was insane. These people didn't want her there. Ethan had only invited her out of politeness, or because his daughters had guilted him into it, or because he felt sorry for her. She was going to show up and ruin their family Christmas with her presence, her otherness, her complete inability to just be normal. "We're here, ma'am," the driver said, pulling up in front of a modest 2-story house that looked like it had been built in the 1950s and lovingly maintained ever since. The siding was clean, the shutters freshly painted, the small front yard neatly kept despite the snow. Christmas lights hung from the eaves, not expensive LED displays, but the old-fashioned colored bulbs that Isabella remembered from her childhood. A plastic reindeer stood sentry by the front door. It was charming, quaint, everything her Beacon Hill townhouse wasn't. "Should I wait, Ms. Grant?" the driver asked. Isabella looked at the house at the warm light glowing in the windows, at the wreath on the door that was slightly crooked. She thought about her empty townhouse, her laptop waiting on the kitchen island, the Malaysia deal that would still be there tomorrow. "No," she said. "I'll call when I need a pickup." She gathered her gifts, stepped out into the cold morning air, and stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, gathering courage. Through the front window she could see movement, small figures running past, the blur of Christmas morning chaos. Before she could talk herself out of it, Isabella walked up the neatly shoveled path and rang the doorbell. The door flew open approximately 1.5 seconds later, revealing both twins in matching red pajamas, their faces alight with excitement. "She came!" Maya shrieked. "We thought maybe you wouldn't come," Lily added. "Of course I came," Isabella said, surprised by how much she meant it. "I promised, didn't I?" The girls grabbed her hands, actual grabbed, with sticky fingers that had probably already been into Christmas candy, and dragged her inside. The house smelled like coffee and cinnamon and something burning, which Isabella assumed was the infamous ham. The living room was small but cozy, with a Christmas tree that leaned slightly to one side, its branches heavy with ornaments that looked handmade and precious. Presents were scattered everywhere, wrapping paper torn and discarded, boxes opened, the beautiful chaos of children who'd been awake since 5 a.m. "Girls, let her take off her coat at least," Ethan's voice called from somewhere deeper in the house, sounding harried. "And close the door, you're letting in the cold." Lily dutifully closed the door while Maya helped Isabella out of her coat, or tried to, getting tangled in the sleeves in a way that was more hindrance than help. Isabella finally extracted herself and hung the coat on an overfull coat rack by the door, adding her boots to the pile of shoes underneath. Ethan appeared from what was presumably the kitchen, wearing jeans and a Boston College sweatshirt that had definitely seen better days. His hair was slightly damp, like he'd just showered, and he had a dish towel thrown over one shoulder. "You actually came," he said, and there was something in his voice, surprise maybe, or relief, that made Isabella's chest tighten. "I don't usually back out of commitments," she said. "Most people wouldn't consider Christmas dinner with strangers a commitment. I'm not most people." They looked at each other across the cluttered living room, and Isabella saw him really see her for the first time. Not the polished woman from the restaurant, but this version of her standing in his messy house in jeans and a plain sweater, looking almost nervous. "No," Ethan said quietly. "I'm beginning to realize you're not." "We got a Lego set," Maya announced, shoving a box into Isabella's hands. "It's a castle, and it has 472 pieces. "That's amazing," Isabella said, examining the box with appropriate appreciation. "And I got a soccer ball signed by the Revolution," Lily added, producing said ball from behind her back. "Uncle Mike has connections." "Uncle Mike knows a guy who knows a guy," Ethan corrected. "Speaking of whom, he should be here soon, and I need to warn you, he's going to have questions." "Questions?" Isabella asked. "About who you are, why you're here, what your intentions are," Ethan said dryly. "He's very protective. It's annoying." "Sounds like a good friend." "The best," Ethan admitted. "Also the most obnoxious. Come on, I'll give you the tour. Fair warning, it takes about 30 seconds. He wasn't wrong. The house was small, living room, kitchen, dining area that was really just an extension of the kitchen, powder room on the first floor, three bedrooms, and a bathroom upstairs. But it was clean and bright and filled with signs of life. Children's artwork on the fridge, books stacked on every available surface, photographs covering an entire wall in the hallway. Isabella paused at that wall, studying the pictures. Most were of the twins at various ages, gap-toothed grins and pigtails and soccer uniforms. But there were others too. A younger Ethan in a cap and gown, arms around an older couple who had to be his parents, a group shot of men in hard hats at a construction site, and there, in a simple frame in the center of the collection, a wedding photo. Ethan looked impossibly young, maybe 25, standing next to a woman with dark hair and a smile that could light up a room. She wore a simple white dress and held a bouquet of sunflowers, and she was looking at Ethan like he was the only person in the world. "That's Sarah," Ethan said quietly, appearing beside Isabella. "The girls are named after her, Sarah Maya. We were going to call them both Sarah if we had twins, but the nurse convinced us that was a terrible idea." "She was beautiful," Isabella said, because it was true, and because what else could you say? She was, Ethan agreed. She was also stubborn and funny and terrible at parking. She once hit the same mailbox 3 times in 1 week. On purpose? I honestly couldn't tell you. There was fondness in his voice, and grief, but also something else, acceptance maybe, the kind that comes from years of living with loss. She would have liked you, I think. She always said I needed more friends who weren't Mike. How do you know we'll be friends? Isabella asked, surprising herself with the vulnerability in the question. Ethan looked at her, really looked at her, and smiled slightly. Because my daughters don't kidnap people unless they've already decided those people are good. And they're never wrong. Before Isabella could respond, the front door burst open and a voice bellowed, "Merry Christmas, you beautiful disasters! Where are my favorite nieces?" "Uncle Mike!" The twins came thundering down the stairs and launched themselves at a large man who'd just entered. He was maybe 6'3", built like someone who'd played football in college and had kept most of the muscle, with a shaved head and a beard that had clearly gotten out of control during the holidays. "There they are!" Mike caught both girls easily, one under each arm, and spun them around. "Have you been good this year, or should I return these presents?" "We've been so good," Maya protested. "Extremely good," Lily added. "Lily, that's not what your dad told me. He said you've been terrors." "Daddy's a liar," Maya said matter-of-factly, which made Mike bark out a laugh. It was then that Mike noticed Isabella standing in the hallway, and his expression shifted from jovial to intensely curious in about half a second. "Well, well," he said, setting the twins down but keeping his eyes on Isabella. "Who do we have here?" "Mike, this is Isabella," Ethan said, his tone carrying a warning. "Isabella, this is Mike Donovan, my best friend and the world's nosiest human being." "Pleased to meet you," Isabella said, extending her hand. Mike shook it with a grip that was firm but not aggressive, still studying her with open interest. "Isabella, pretty name. So how do you know Ethan?" "We met at the restaurant last night," Isabella said. "Your nieces invited me to dinner." "They invited you," Mike repeated slowly, looking at Ethan. "The girls invited a complete stranger to Christmas dinner." "It sounds worse when you say it like that," Ethan muttered. "And you just agreed to come?" Mike asked Isabella. "You didn't have family plans or a boyfriend waiting or anything?" "Mike," Ethan said sharply. "What? I'm just asking the normal questions that normal people ask when strangers show up on Christmas." "It's okay," Isabella said, though she was beginning to understand what Ethan meant about his friend being protective. "No, I didn't have other plans, and no boyfriend. The date I had planned for last night fell through." "Fell through how?" Mike asked. "He stood her up," Maya supplied helpfully. "He was dumb and mean." Mike's expression darkened. "He stood you up on Christmas Eve? Well, what kind of—" He caught himself, glancing at the twins. "What kind of person does that?" "Apparently the kind who thinks I'm too intense," Isabella said dryly. "His loss," Mike said immediately, and there was something in his voice that suggested he was reserving judgment but willing to be convinced. "Well, any friend of these troublemakers is welcome here. Come on, let's get some coffee before Ethan burns the ham." "I'm not burning the ham," Ethan called after them as Mike herded everyone toward the kitchen. "You're the one who burned it last year." The kitchen was small but efficient, with counters covered in various stages of meal preparation. There was indeed a ham in the oven, and while Isabella couldn't tell if it was burning, it certainly smelled interesting. "Coffee?" Ethan offered, already reaching for a mug. "Please," Isabella said gratefully. He poured her a cup from a pot that looked like it had been brewing since dawn, and Isabella took a sip of coffee that was strong enough to strip paint. She managed not to cough. "Too strong?" Ethan asked, noticing her expression. "It's perfect," Isabella lied, and saw him smile slightly, like he knew exactly what she was thinking. Mike had settled at the kitchen table with his own coffee, watching the interaction with the intensity of someone conducting an investigation. The twins had already lost interest and were back in the living room, arguing over whose turn it was to build the Lego castle. "So, Isabella," Mike said casually, "what do you do for work?" Here it was, the moment where everything would change. Isabella could lie, could be vague, could deflect, but something about this house, these people, made her want to be honest. "I run a company," she said. Grant Industries. There was a moment of absolute silence. Then Mike set down his coffee cup very carefully. Grant Industries, he repeated. As in the Grant Industries? The massive conglomerate that just bought out Tech Corp last month for like $3 billion? $2.8 billion, Isabella corrected automatically, then winced. But yes, that one. Mike looked at Ethan, who was staring at Isabella with an expression of dawning realization. You're that Isabella Grant, Ethan said slowly. The CEO, the one who was on the cover of Forbes. That was 2 years ago, Isabella said, as if this somehow made it better. Holy shit, Mike breathed. Ethan, do you know who's standing in your kitchen? Mike, language, Ethan said absently, still staring at Isabella. There are kids in the next room. Do you know how much this woman is worth? Mike was scrolling through his phone now, apparently looking up Isabella's net worth in real time. It says here, oh my God, oh my actual God. Mike, stop, Ethan said more firmly this time. He was still looking at Isabella, and she couldn't read his expression. Shock, certainly. Maybe anger? Maybe disgust at her deception? Why didn't you say something? Ethan asked quietly. When should I have mentioned it? Isabella asked, hearing the defensiveness in her own voice. When your daughters were asking me about breadsticks? When we were talking about your wife? When exactly was the right moment to announce that I'm a billionaire? Maybe before you agreed to come to my house? Ethan suggested, his voice tight. Would it have changed anything? Isabella challenged. Yes, no, I don't know. Ethan ran his hand through his hair in that gesture of frustration she was beginning to recognize. Jesus, Isabella, you must have thought that this whole thing was what? Isabella demanded. Charming, yes, genuine, absolutely. The best Christmas Eve I've had in a decade, all of the above. What exactly do you think I thought? That we were some kind of charity case, Ethan said, his voice rising, that you were slumming it with the working class, feeling good about yourself for eating with the poor people. That's not, Isabella started, but Mike interrupted. Okay, time out, he said, standing up and positioning himself between them. Everyone needs to take a breath. Stay out of this, Mike, Ethan said. Not a chance. You, Mike pointed at Ethan, are spiraling because your ego is bruised, and you, he pointed at Isabella, are getting defensive because you feel judged. Both of you need to calm down and remember that there are 2 kids in the next room who are going to be devastated if this goes south. Ethan and Isabella stared at each other across the kitchen, and Isabella felt something crumbling inside her. This was exactly what she'd been afraid of. This was why she'd hesitated to come. Money ruined everything. It always did. I should go, she said quietly, setting down her coffee mug. This was a mistake. Isabella, Ethan started, but she was already moving toward the hallway. Wait! Maya's voice stopped her. Both twins were standing in the doorway, having clearly heard at least part of the argument. You can't leave! You just got here! I think your dad needs some time, Isabella began. We don't care if you're rich, Lily interrupted. We thought you were probably rich anyway. Your coat was really nice. Despite everything, Isabella almost smiled. You noticed that, huh? We notice everything, Maya said seriously, but it doesn't matter. You were sad and alone and we liked you. That's what matters. From the mouths of babes, Isabella thought for the second time in 12 hours. She looked at Ethan, who'd followed her into the hallway. His face was a complicated mix of emotions, anger, embarrassment, something that might have been fear. I don't think you're a charity case, Isabella said quietly. I think you're someone who opened his home to a stranger because his daughters asked him to, even though it probably went against every protective instinct you have. I think you're someone who's been raising 2 incredible children alone while dealing with grief that would break most people. And I think you're scared that I'm going to judge you or pity you or somehow use my money to make you feel small. But I'm not. I wouldn't. I couldn't. Because you're not small. None of you are. Ethan was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was rough. I'm sorry. You're right. That was my ego talking. It's just this house, this life. It's not much compared to what you're probably used to, and I... Stop, Isabella interrupted. This house? It's full of love and laughter and memories. My house is 5 stories of expensive emptiness that echoes when I walk through it. Don't you dare apologize for having something real." They stood there in the hallway, neither quite willing to back down, both carrying their own wounds. "Can we start over?" Ethan finally asked. "Pretend the last 5 minutes didn't happen?" "Only if you stop treating me like I'm some kind of exotic creature from another planet," Isabella said. "I'm just a person, Ethan. A very successful, very lonely person who got stood up on Christmas Eve and was rescued by 2 7-year-olds. That's the whole story." "Okay," Ethan said. "Okay. You're just a person. A person who would really like to stay for Christmas dinner if the invitation still stands." "It stands," Ethan said, and this time when he smiled, it reached his eyes. "But I'm warning you, Mike's ham really is terrible." "I heard that," Mike called from the kitchen. The twins cheered and grabbed Isabella's hands again, dragging her back toward the living room. The tension didn't disappear entirely. It still hung in the air like smoke, but it had eased enough that breathing felt possible again. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of activity. The girls insisted on showing Isabella every single present they'd received, complete with detailed explanations of why each item was special. Mike regaled her with embarrassing stories about Ethan from their college days, including one about a disastrous attempt to cook Thanksgiving dinner that had resulted in the fire department being called. Ethan retaliated with stories about Mike's various failed romantic endeavors, which were apparently numerous and spectacular. "There was the woman who thought he was a professional hockey player," Ethan said, grinning at his friend's discomfort. "I never said I played for the Bruins," Mike protested. "She assumed. You wore a Bruins jersey and didn't correct her for 3 dates." "I was trying to build mystery." Isabella found herself laughing, really laughing, the kind that came from the belly and felt like a release. When was the last time she'd laughed like this? When was the last time she'd been around people who didn't want something from her, who weren't performing or calculating or positioning themselves? Around 1 o'clock, they sat down to dinner at a table that was slightly too small for 5 people but managed anyway. The ham was indeed burned on one side, but Mike insisted this was caramelization and refused to take blame. There were mashed potatoes that were lumpy, green beans that were mushy, and rolls that were store-bought but warm. It was perfect. "Before we eat," Lily said seriously, "we should go around and say what we're grateful for. That's what we always do." "I'll start," Maya volunteered. "I'm grateful for our new Lego set, and for Isabella coming to visit, and for Daddy not burning the house down this year." "That was one time," Ethan protested. "I'm grateful for my soccer ball," Lily said, "and for Uncle Mike, even though he burns ham, and for Isabella having a terrible date last night because otherwise we wouldn't have met her." Isabella felt her throat tighten. Leave it to a child to find the silver lining in humiliation. "I'm grateful for these 2 troublemakers," Mike said, ruffling the twins' hair, "and for Ethan being too stubborn to give up even when things are hard, and for Isabella being brave enough to join this circus." All eyes turned to Ethan, who'd been pushing mashed potatoes around his plate with unnecessary focus. "I'm grateful," he said slowly, "that my daughters have better social skills than I do, that they see the best in people instead of assuming the worst, and that they dragged home a stray who turned out to be pretty interesting." "Did you just call me a stray?" Isabella asked. "Would you prefer unexpected dinner guest?" "I would prefer delightful addition to your family celebration," Isabella said primly, and got rewarded with laughter from everyone at the table. "Your turn," Maya prompted. "What are you grateful for?" Isabella looked around the table at these people who barely knew her, who'd welcomed her anyway, who'd fought with her and forgiven her in the space of 10 minutes. She thought about her empty townhouse, her waiting laptop, all the things she'd chosen over moments like this. "I'm grateful," she said quietly, "that 2 little girls had the courage to talk to a stranger, that their father had the generosity to invite her into his home, that I had the wisdom to say yes, and that sometimes the worst nights lead to the best mornings." There was a moment of silence, and then Maya said matter-of-factly, "You're going to make Daddy cry again." "I'm not crying," Ethan said, but his voice was suspiciously rough. "You cry at everything," Lily said. "You cried during the toothpaste commercial last week." That was a very moving commercial about family bonding. They ate, and they talked, and the afternoon stretched into evening. At some point, Mike pulled out a deck of cards and taught Isabella to play poker, which she picked up with alarming speed. "You're counting cards," Mike accused after she won her third hand in a row. "I'm good at math," Isabella corrected. "There's a difference." "She's hustling us," Ethan said, but he was smiling. "We've been hustled." The twins built their Lego castle on the living room floor, while the adults watched, offering occasionally helpful and frequently terrible advice. When Isabella suggested a specific structural approach that would make the towers more stable, Ethan gave her a look. "How do you know about load-bearing architecture?" he asked. "I own 3 construction companies," Isabella said. "I pick things up." "3 construction companies," Ethan repeated. "Of course you do." But there was no anger in his voice this time, just a kind of bemused acceptance. As the sky outside darkened and the twins started showing signs of crashing from their sugar highs, Isabella realized with surprise that it was nearly 7 o'clock. She'd been here for 10 hours. 10 hours that had felt like both minutes and days. "I should probably go," she said reluctantly. "Let you guys have your evening." "Do you have to?" Maya asked, looking up from the half-built castle with disappointment. "I'm afraid so. I have a meeting tomorrow that I need to prepare for." "On the day after Christmas?" Mike asked. "International business doesn't take holidays," Isabella said with a shrug. She called her driver, gathered her things, and said goodbye to the twins with promises that she'd visit again soon, promises that surprised her with how much she meant them. Mike shook her hand at the door with a firm grip and said quietly, "You're all right, Grant. Take care of yourself." "You too, Donovan." Ethan walked her out to the street, where her car was just pulling up, sleek and black and completely out of place in this neighborhood of modest sedans and minivans. "That's quite a car," Ethan observed. "It's just transportation," Isabella said, but they both knew it wasn't. They stood there in the cold evening air, breath fogging between them, and Isabella felt the weight of everything unsaid. "Thank you," she finally said. "For today. For not kicking me out when you found out who I was. For letting me be part of this." "Thank you for coming," Ethan replied. "For being honest with the girls, for beating Mike at poker, for reminding me that not everyone with money is—" He stopped, and Isabella finished for him. "Terrible?" "I was going to say unapproachable," Ethan said. "But yeah, that too." The driver got out and opened the back door, waiting patiently. Isabella knew she should get in, should leave, should return to her real life and let this family return to theirs. But something made her hesitate. "Ethan," she said, "would you want to get coffee sometime? Just the two of us, without the girls as intermediaries?" He looked surprised, then thoughtful. "Like a date?" "Like 2 people who enjoy talking to each other having coffee," Isabella said carefully. "What happens after that, we can figure out as we go." Ethan was quiet for a long moment, and Isabella watched him think, watched him weigh whatever internal calculations he was making. Finally, he nodded. "Okay," he said. "Coffee. Just coffee." "Just coffee," Isabella agreed. She got into the car, and as it pulled away, she looked back to see Ethan still standing on the sidewalk, hands in his pockets, watching her leave. The Christmas lights from his house cast colored shadows across the snow, and Isabella thought about how different this day had been from what she'd expected. She'd expected to work, to be alone, to treat December 25th like any other day. Instead, she'd laughed until her sides hurt, played poker with a man who was terrible at bluffing, helped 2 7-year-olds build a structurally questionable Lego castle, and eaten possibly the worst ham in Boston history. It had been perfect. As the car merged onto the highway, Isabella pulled out her phone and found a text, waiting from an unknown number. "This is Ethan. The girls made me promise to text you to make sure you got home safe. Also, they want to know if you can come to Lily's soccer game next Saturday. Fair warning, they're terrible." Isabella smiled and typed back, "Made it safely, and I'd love to come to the game." How terrible are we talking? They've scored on their own goal twice this season. "I'll bring my camera. I'll bring my—" She leaned back against the leather seat and watched the city lights blur past. Somewhere in this vast, complicated city, 2 little girls were probably already asleep, exhausted from the excitement of Christmas. Somewhere, a widowed father was cleaning up dinner dishes and wondering what he'd gotten himself into. And somewhere, in a car heading toward Beacon Hill, in a space between her old life and whatever came next, Isabella Grant was smiling. Because sometimes the best gifts aren't the ones you plan for. Sometimes they're the ones that find you when you're not even looking. The coffee shop Ethan chose was deliberately neutral territory, a small place in Cambridge called Flower, known more for its pastries than its ambiance. Isabella arrived 15 minutes early, which was unlike her. She was usually precisely on time, having calculated travel down to the minute. But today she'd left her townhouse early, had her driver circle the block twice, and now sat in a corner booth nursing an Americano and trying not to check her reflection in her phone screen for the third time. She was nervous. Isabella Grant, who'd negotiated deals with Fortune 500 CEOs without breaking a sweat, who'd stared down hostile board members and venture capitalists who thought a woman couldn't run a tech conglomerate, was nervous about coffee with a structural engineer from Dorchester. The door chimed and Ethan walked in, scanning the room until he spotted her. He was wearing jeans and a jacket that looked warm but worn, and he had snowflakes in his hair from the light flurry that had started outside. When he smiled at her, tentative but genuine, Isabella felt something flutter in her chest that she absolutely refused to name. "Hi," he said, sliding into the booth across from her. "Sorry I'm late. The tea was running behind." "You took the tea?" Isabella asked before she could stop herself. "I don't own a car," Ethan said simply. "Never needed one in the city." "Why? Did you drive?" Isabella thought about the Tesla waiting 3 blocks away, about her driver reading a book in the front seat. Something like that. They ordered another coffee for Ethan, a croissant for Isabella that she had no intention of eating, and then sat in the kind of awkward silence that happens when two people realize they don't actually know each other that well, despite having shared Christmas dinner. "So," Ethan started, then stopped. Started again. "This is weird, right? This feels weird." "Extremely weird," Isabella agreed and felt some of the tension ease at the admission. "Why did we agree to this?" Ethan asked, but he was smiling slightly. "Because your daughters are very persuasive, and I apparently can't say no to 7-year-olds. They didn't arrange this coffee date." "Didn't they, though?" Isabella challenged. "If they hadn't kidnapped me from the restaurant, we wouldn't be here." "True," Ethan conceded. He took a sip of his coffee, studying her over the rim of his cup. "Can I ask you something?" "That depends on what you're asking." "Why did you really come on Christmas? And don't say it's because the girls invited you. You could have made an excuse, sent a polite text, spent the day doing whatever billionaires do on holidays." Isabella considered lying, considered deflecting. But there was something about Ethan's direct gaze, about the way he asked questions like he actually wanted to hear the answers, that made her want to be honest. "Because I was tired of being alone," she said simply. "Because I've spent the last 3 Christmases working in my office, telling myself it was a choice, that I preferred it that way. Because when your daughters looked at me with those eyes and asked me to come, I realized I'd been waiting for someone to ask, for anyone to ask." Ethan was quiet for a moment, processing this. "That's honest. You asked for honest." "I did," he agreed. "Okay, my turn for honest. I almost canceled this morning. 3 times. "Why didn't you?" "Because Mike said if I did, he'd physically drag me here himself. Also because the girls have been talking about you nonstop for the past 3 days, and I was afraid they'd stage some kind of intervention if I backed out." "So we're both here under duress," Isabella observed. "Looks like it." They smiled at each other, and some of the weirdness dissolved. "Tell me about your work," Isabella said. "The girls mentioned you do consulting now instead of actual building?" Ethan's expression shifted, became more guarded. "Yeah, I used to work for a firm downtown, big commercial projects, but after Sarah died, I couldn't do the hours anymore. Couldn't be on site for weeks at a time, couldn't travel. So I went independent, started taking smaller consulting jobs. Safety assessments, structural reviews, that kind of thing. It's not as exciting, but the hours are better, and I can work from home when I need to." "You gave up your career to raise your daughters," Isabella said quietly. "I wouldn't put it like that. I adjusted my career. There's a difference." "Is there? Because it sounds like you sacrificed a lot." Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. "They're my daughters. You don't sacrifice for your kids. You just do what needs to be done. That's not heroic. It's basic parenting. A lot of people wouldn't see it that way." "Then a lot of people shouldn't have kids," Ethan said bluntly. Then he seemed to realize how harsh that sounded and softened. Sorry, it's a sore subject. I get tired of people treating me like some kind of saint for doing the bare minimum of taking care of my own children. I wasn't trying to. I know. I'm just defensive about it. Comes from too many well-meaning people telling me how hard it must be, how brave I am, how Sarah would be proud, like I have a choice, like I could have just handed them off to someone else and gone back to my life. Isabella thought about her own choices, about the relationships she'd ended because they interfered with business, about the friends she'd lost touch with because they couldn't understand her schedule, about all the times she'd chosen success over connection and told herself it was the smart decision. What was she like? Isabella asked quietly. Sarah? Ethan's expression changed completely, the defensiveness melting into something softer and sadder. She was loud, he said, a smile ghosting across his face. Not in an obnoxious way, just in a way that filled up a room. You always knew when she was around. She laughed at her own jokes. She cried at commercials. She felt everything intensely. It was exhausting and wonderful. How did you meet? College, Boston College. I was studying engineering. She was pre-med. We met at a party I didn't want to go to, had our first date at a terrible Chinese restaurant that gave us both food poisoning, and were engaged within a year. Everyone said we were too young, too different, too fast. They were probably right, but we didn't care. She was going to be a doctor? Pediatrician, Ethan confirmed. She loved kids, always had. When we found out she was pregnant, with twins no less, she was over the moon, kept saying it was fate, that she was meant to have two so she could love them twice as hard. She made all these plans, picked out names, decorated the nursery. She was going to take a year off and then go back to finish her residency. She had it all figured out. His voice had gone flat again, the way it did when he talked about painful things. What happened? Isabella asked gently. Preeclampsia, Ethan said. Her blood pressure spiked during delivery. They did an emergency C-section, got the girls out safely, but Sarah started hemorrhaging. They tried everything. It wasn't enough. She held them once for maybe 2 minutes, and then she was gone. Isabella felt tears prick her eyes. Ethan, I'm so sorry. Everyone's sorry, Ethan said, not unkindly. Sorry doesn't change anything. Sorry doesn't bring her back. Sorry doesn't explain to 2 7-year-olds why they don't have a mother when all their friends do. Do they ask about her? All the time. They want to know what she looked like, what she sounded like, whether she would have liked their soccer playing or their art projects or their choice of breakfast cereal. I tell them everything I can remember, but it's never enough. How do you give someone a mother in stories? You do your best, Isabella said. That's all any of us can do. Ethan looked at her sharply. You say that like you understand. Isabella hesitated, then decided that if Ethan could be vulnerable, so could she. My father died when I was 16. Heart attack, completely unexpected. One day he was there, the next he wasn't. My mother sort of collapsed into herself afterward, became this ghost in our house. So in a lot of ways, I lost both parents that year. I'm sorry, Ethan said, and it didn't sound empty when he said it. Everyone's sorry, Isabella echoed his words back to him with a slight smile. But you're right. It doesn't change anything. What it did do was make me self-sufficient. Maybe too self-sufficient. I learned early that the only person I could really count on was myself. Is that why you built your company? Partially. That and spite. Ethan raised his eyebrows. Spite. My mother's family had money. Old Connecticut money, the kind that comes with expectations and traditions and very specific ideas about what women should and shouldn't do. When I told them I wanted to start a business instead of going to law school or marrying appropriately, they laughed. Actually laughed. Said I'd fail within a year and come crawling back. I'm guessing you didn't. I didn't crawl back. I also didn't fail. I succeeded so spectacularly that now they call twice a year asking for donations to their various causes. I never call back. That's cold. They earned it, Isabella said without apology. They chose their pride over supporting family. They live with the consequences. Ethan studied her thoughtfully. You're harder than you seem at first. Is that a compliment or a criticism? An observation? You're all soft edges and politeness until someone pushes, and then there's steel underneath. You have to be steel in my world, Isabella said. Soft doesn't survive. That sounds exhausting. It is, Isabella admitted, surprising herself with the honesty. It's incredibly exhausting, which is maybe why I enjoyed Christmas so much. Nobody wanted anything from me. Nobody was trying to impress me or use me or position themselves for advantage. Your daughters just wanted someone to play Legos with. They did make you build that whole East Tower by yourself, Ethan pointed out. It was structurally unsound. I was helping. You were showing off. Maybe a little, Isabella conceded with a smile. They talked for over an hour, their coffees going cold as the conversation flowed from heavy topics to lighter ones. Isabella learned that Ethan was terrible at cooking anything that wasn't breakfast food, that he'd once accidentally locked himself out of his house while taking out the trash in his underwear, that his biggest fear was that he was somehow failing his daughters in ways he couldn't see. Ethan learned that Isabella played piano, but hadn't touched one in years, that she'd once impulsively bought a vineyard in Napa and then had no idea what to do with it, that she collected first editions of books she'd loved as a child but was too afraid to actually read them in case she damaged the pages. That's the saddest thing I've ever heard, Ethan said when she mentioned the books. What's the point of owning them if you don't read them? They're investments, Isabella protested. They're books. They're meant to be read, not locked in a climate-controlled room like artifacts. They're valuable. They're lonely, Ethan countered. Sitting on a shelf, never being touched, never having their pages turned. That's a waste. Isabella opened her mouth to argue, then realized he was right. When had she become someone who treated everything like an investment instead of just experiencing things for their own sake? You should come see my library sometime, she heard herself say. Judge for yourself. Ethan's expression shifted to something she couldn't quite read. Is that an invitation? It's an invitation to look at books, Isabella said carefully. What happens after that, we can figure out as we go. Where have I heard that before? Ethan murmured, but he was smiling. They left the coffee shop together, walking out into the afternoon snow that was falling heavier now, coating the streets in fresh white. Ethan pulled up his collar against the cold while Isabella stood there, underdressed as usual, too stubborn to admit she was freezing. Do you need a ride? She asked. I have a car nearby. I'm good with the tea, Ethan said, but thank you. They stood there on the sidewalk, neither quite ready to leave, both aware that this moment mattered somehow. Other pedestrians flowed around them, holiday shoppers and students and people going about their lives, completely unaware that two strangers were trying to figure out what they were becoming to each other. Can I ask you something? Ethan said finally. You've been asking me things all afternoon. One more, he pressed. Why me? You could date anyone, businessmen, doctors, lawyers, people from your world. Why would you want to spend time with a single dad from Dorchester who barely makes rent some months? Isabella looked at him, really looked at him, at the snowflakes catching in his dark hair, at the lines around his eyes that spoke of too many sleepless nights, at the way he stood like someone who'd learned to hold himself together through sheer force of will. Because you're real, she said simply. Because you look at me and see a person, not a bank account. Because your daughters have better judgment than most adults I know. Because when I'm with you, I don't have to be Isabella Grant, CEO. I can just be Isabella. And I haven't felt that way in a very long time. Ethan was quiet for a long moment, his breath fogging in the cold air between them. Then he said, I'm terrified of this. Of what? Of you. Of whatever this is. Of screwing it up and hurting the girls because I let someone into our lives who doesn't belong there. The words stung, but Isabella understood them. I'm terrified too, she admitted. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to be with someone without controlling everything, without protecting myself, without keeping one foot out the door in case things go wrong. So we're both terrified, completely terrified. Great, Ethan said, but there was a hint of humor in his voice. That's a solid foundation for whatever this is. The best relationships are probably built on mutual terror, Isabella said. Is that what we're building? A relationship? Isabella's phone buzzed in her pocket. Probably her assistant, probably something urgent. She ignored it. I don't know what we're building, but I'd like to find out if you would. Ethan looked at her for another long moment, and Isabella watched him make the decision in real time. Watched him choose courage over fear, possibility over safety. "Okay," he said quietly, "let's find out." They exchanged a few more words about logistics, when they might see each other again, whether the girls should be involved or if they should keep this separate for now. And then Ethan was walking away toward the T station, and Isabella was calling her driver. In the car heading back to Beacon Hill, Isabella's phone buzzed again. This time she looked. 7 missed calls from her assistant, 12 emails flagged urgent, 3 text messages about the Malaysia deal that apparently couldn't wait until after New Year's. She stared at the notifications for a moment, then put the phone face down on the seat beside her and looked out the window at the snow-covered city. For the first time in her professional life, the urgent matters could wait. The next 2 weeks fell into a pattern that surprised Isabella with its naturalness. She and Ethan texted daily, nothing profound, just small observations about their days. He sent her pictures of the girls' latest art projects and soccer mishaps. She sent him articles about structural engineering that she thought he might find interesting. Sometimes they talked on the phone late at night, after the twins were asleep, conversations that wandered from the profound to the ridiculous. "What's the weirdest business meeting you've ever had?" Ethan asked one night. "I once had a potential investor show up wearing a full medieval knight costume," Isabella said. "Said it helped him think like a warrior." "Did you take his money?" "Hell no. Anyone who needs armor to make business decisions has deeper issues than I want to deal with." "Fair point. What about the best meeting?" Isabella thought about this. There was a woman, maybe 3 years ago. She'd invented this new type of solar panel coating, was trying to get funding to scale production. She came in with this battered laptop and a prototype she'd built in her garage. No fancy presentation, no corporate polish, just pure passion for her work. I funded her on the spot. "How's she doing?" "Her company is worth $40 million now. She still sends me Christmas cards with handwritten notes." Those are the meetings I love. The ones where you can see someone's whole future in their eyes, and you get to be part of making it happen. "That's what I loved about building," Ethan said quietly. "Getting to see something go from blueprints to reality. Watching a structure rise from nothing and knowing it'll be there for decades, maybe longer. That your calculations kept it standing through storms and snow and time. Do you miss it? The building part, not the consulting?" "Every day," Ethan admitted. "But I wouldn't trade what I have now. The girls need stability more than I need professional fulfillment." "What if you could have both?" "That's a fantasy, Isabella. Single parents don't get to have it all." "What if I told you that's bullshit?" Isabella challenged. "What if I told you that you've bought into a narrative that says you have to sacrifice everything for your kids when really you could find a way to do both?" "Easy for you to say. You don't have kids." "No, but I have eyes, and I can see that you're withering a little more every day, convincing yourself that this half-life is enough." "When was the last time you worked on a project that excited you? Not paid your bills, not was safe and stable, but actually excited you?" Ethan was quiet for so long that Isabella thought she'd pushed too hard. Then he said, 6 years ago. There was this community center in Roxbury, the one I was consulting on when Sarah went into labor. I never finished it." "Why not?" "Because by the time I could work again, they'd hired someone else. The project was done. I missed my chance." "So find another project," Isabella said. "Find something that matters to you and figure out how to make it work with your life instead of sacrificing one for the other." "You make it sound simple." "It's not simple, but it's possible. You just have to believe you deserve both." Another long silence. Then Ethan said, "You're kind of intense, you know that?" "I've been told." "That guy who stood you up was an idiot." "Yes," Isabella agreed. "He really was." They saw each other in person twice more before New Year's. Once for lunch at a diner Ethan loved that served breakfast all day. Once for a walk through the public garden despite the freezing temperatures. Each time, Isabella felt the walls between them lowering incrementally. Each time, she learned something new. She learned that Ethan's favorite color was blue, but he could never remember which shade. That he'd wanted to be an astronaut as a kid until he realized he was afraid of heights. That he'd proposed to Sarah during a thunderstorm because he was too impatient to wait for better weather. That he still wore his wedding ring sometimes, on a chain under his shirt, because taking it off completely felt like abandonment, even though she was gone. Ethan learned that Isabella stress baked at 2 in the morning when she couldn't sleep, that she'd never learned to ride a bike and was embarrassed about it, that she donated anonymously to dozens of charities but never attended their galas because she hated performative philanthropy, that she'd been engaged once at 28 to a man who'd proposed in front of 100 people at a charity event and had been furious when she'd said she needed time to think. "What happened?" Ethan asked. "I realized he'd proposed publicly, so I couldn't say no without humiliating him. That the whole thing was a power play disguised as romance, so I said yes in the moment, then broke it off the next day." "How'd he take it?" "Badly. He told everyone I was cold and unfeeling and married to my work. He wasn't entirely wrong, but his motivations weren't exactly pure either." "Do you regret it?" "Not for a second. Better to be alone than with someone who sees you as a trophy." On New Year's Eve, Ethan called her around 8 p.m. Isabella was in her home office, reviewing documents for the Malaysia deal, when her phone rang. "What are you doing?" he asked without preamble. "Working," Isabella admitted. "What are you doing?" "The girls are at a sleepover at Mike's place. He's got his niece visiting and they're having some kind of princess marathon. I'm sitting in my living room drinking beer and wondering why I agreed to let them have sugar after 8 p.m. "Sounds nice." "It sounds like I'm going to pay for this tomorrow when Mike returns them completely wired and probably covered in glitter. What are you really doing?" Isabella looked at the documents spread across her desk, at her laptop screen full of spreadsheets. "Honestly, avoiding the fact that it's New Year's Eve and I'm alone." "Want some company?" Isabella's heart jumped. "Are you asking to come over?" "I'm asking if you want to split a pizza and watch the ball drop with someone instead of alone. No pressure, just two people who are both apparently working on New Year's Eve being pathetic together." That's the worst pitch I've ever heard." "I'm out of practice. Is that a yes or a no?" Isabella looked around her empty office, thought about the hours stretching ahead of her, thought about Ethan sitting in his own empty house, probably wearing sweatpants and drinking cheap beer, thought about how much easier it would be to say no, to keep that distance, to protect herself from whatever this was becoming. "Yes," she heard herself say. "That's a yes, but I'm ordering the pizza and it's going to be from a place that costs more than you're comfortable with. As long as it has pepperoni, I don't care where it comes from." An hour later, Ethan was standing in the doorway of her Beacon Hill townhouse, staring at the marble floors and the sweeping staircase and the chandelier that probably cost more than his annual salary. "Holy shit," he breathed. "Don't," Isabella warned. "Don't do the thing where you get weird about the house." "Isabella, this isn't a house. This is a museum that someone happens to sleep in. It's just where I live." "Just where you live," Ethan repeated, stepping inside and craning his neck to look up at the ceiling that soared 2 stories above them. "Right, and I just live in a modest 2-story that could probably fit in your foyer." "Are we going to do this all night?" Isabella asked, hands on her hips. "Because if we are, I'm going to eat all the pizza myself." That got his attention. "You wouldn't." "Try me." Ethan followed her through the house to the kitchen, which was all marble countertops and professional-grade appliances that Isabella barely knew how to use. The pizza had arrived just before Ethan, and she'd left it on the island, along with plates and napkins and beer from her mostly empty fridge. "You have a sub-zero refrigerator," Ethan observed, "and you're still being weird about the house. Can you blame me? I fix structural problems in triple-deckers. You live in something that should have a historical plaque." "It does have a historical plaque," Isabella muttered. "It's on the front, built in 1875, owned by some shipping merchant. I bought it 8 years ago for more money than I want to think about." They ate pizza standing at the island because Isabella's formal dining room felt too stuffy and her living room furniture was too pristine for food. Ethan told her about the girls' latest soccer game. They'd lost spectacularly but had celebrated anyway because Maya had finally learned to kick without closing her eyes. Isabella told him about the Malaysia deal, about the intricacies of international expansion and regulatory frameworks. "I have no idea what half those words mean," Ethan admitted. "That's because you're a normal person, and I've been doing this too long." "Do you like it? The work? The deals? All of it?" Isabella considered this. "I like winning. I like building something from nothing. I like proving people wrong. Whether that's the same as liking the work itself, I honestly don't know anymore." "That's sad." That's honest. They moved to the living room eventually, settling on opposite ends of a couch that Isabella had chosen more for aesthetics than comfort. Ethan kept looking around like he expected someone to jump out and tell him he didn't belong here. Relax, Isabella told him. It's just a house. It's really not, though. Okay, it's an absurdly expensive house that I bought because I could and because I wanted to prove something to myself and to people who didn't care. But right now, it's just where we're sitting. Can that be enough? Ethan looked at her, really looked at her, and something in his expression softened. Yeah, he said quietly. That can be enough. They watched TV, some comedy special that was fine but not particularly funny, and slowly, incrementally, the space between them on the couch decreased. Isabella wasn't sure who moved first, but by the time the ball was dropping in Times Square on the screen, they were sitting close enough that she could feel the warmth of him beside her. 10, the crowd on TV counted down. 9, 8. This is weird, right? Ethan said. Us being here, doing this? Completely weird, Isabella agreed. 7, 6, 5. I'm going to kiss you at midnight, Ethan said, not quite looking at her. Just so you know, so you can object if that's not okay. Isabella's heart was hammering. I'm not objecting. 4, 3, 2, 1. Happy New Year. Ethan turned to her, cupped her face in both hands with the gentleness that made her breath catch, and kissed her. It was soft at first, tentative, a question more than a statement. Isabella answered by leaning into him, by letting her hands find their way to his shoulders, by kissing him back with all the loneliness and longing she'd been carrying. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. Well, he said, that happened. That definitely happened, Isabella agreed. I should probably go, Ethan said, but he didn't move. You probably should, Isabella said, but she didn't pull away. They sat there in the dim light of her too-perfect living room, holding on to each other like lifelines, and Isabella thought about all the New Year's Eves she'd spent alone, telling herself she preferred it that way. She'd been lying to herself. This warmth, this connection, this terrifying vulnerability, this was what she'd been missing. Ethan did eventually leave, with promises to text when he got home, with one more kiss at the door that turned into 3. Isabella stood in her empty foyer after he'd gone, touching her lips, feeling like a teenager after her first kiss. Her phone buzzed. A text from Ethan. Made it home. Girls still at Mike's. House is weird and quiet without them. She typed back, my house is weird and quiet with or without people. That's what happens when you buy a museum. You could get a dog. I could get a lot of things. Doesn't mean I should. You could get a structural engineer who comes with twin 7-year-olds? Is that an offer or a hypothetical? Long pause. Then, I don't know yet. Ask me again in a month. I will. Isabella went upstairs to her bedroom, a massive space with vaulted ceilings and windows overlooking the city, and got ready for bed. She caught sight of herself in the bathroom mirror and was startled by the expression on her face. She looked happy, genuinely, uncomplicated happy. When was the last time she'd looked like that? She couldn't remember. That night, instead of reviewing documents or answering emails, Isabella lay in bed thinking about the way Ethan had touched her face before kissing her, about the calluses on his hands from years of work, about the way he'd looked at her townhouse with wonder instead of envy, appreciation instead of greed, about the way he'd said, you could get a structural engineer who comes with twin 7-year-olds, like it was a real possibility and not just a fantasy. Could she, though? Could Isabella Grant, who'd built walls around herself so high and so thick that most people couldn't even see them anymore, actually let someone in? Could she make space in her perfectly controlled life for chaos and soccer games and Lego castles? Could she be what Ethan and his daughters needed? Or would she just end up being one more person who disappointed them? These were the questions that kept her awake long into the first hours of the new year, questions that didn't have easy answers, questions that scared her more than any business deal ever had. But for the first time in her adult life, Isabella was willing to ask them, and that had to count for something. January came with the kind of bitter cold that made Boston feel like a punishment, the wind off the harbor cutting through even the most expensive winter coats. Isabella stood outside St. Mary's Elementary School at 3:15 on a Wednesday afternoon, watching parents cluster in groups while they waited for dismissal, and wondered what the hell she was doing here. She'd offered to pick up the girls. It had seemed like a nice gesture when Ethan had mentioned his car consultation running late, a way to be helpful without being intrusive. Now, standing among mothers in practical parkas and fathers in work boots, Isabella felt conspicuous in her Burberry coat and leather gloves, like an exotic bird that had wandered into the wrong habitat. The doors burst open and children poured out in a cacophony of backpacks and shouting. Isabella scanned the crowd until she spotted the twins, walking out hand in hand with that unconscious synchronization that twins seem to have. They saw her simultaneously, their faces lighting up with identical expressions of surprise and delight. "Isabella!" Maya shrieked, breaking into a run that Lily immediately matched. They crashed into her with enough force that Isabella had to brace herself, two small bodies wrapping around her waist in a hug that felt both overwhelming and necessary. "What are you doing here?" Lily demanded. "Your dad got stuck at work," Isabella explained. "I offered to pick you up. Is that okay?" "It's so okay," Maya said. "Can we get ice cream?" "It's January," Isabella pointed out. "Ice cream doesn't have a season," Lily said with the kind of logic that was hard to argue with. Isabella glanced around and noticed several mothers watching this exchange with undisguised curiosity. One of them, a blonde woman in a North Face jacket, approached with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Hi there," the woman said. "I'm Jennifer, Lily's classroom mom. I don't think we've met." "Isabella," she replied, extending her hand. "I'm a friend of Ethan's." "A friend," Jennifer repeated, her tone suggesting she'd caught the slight hesitation before the word. "How nice. The girls have mentioned you. Said you came for Christmas?" "I did." "That must have been cozy. Just the four of you?" Isabella recognized a fishing expedition when she heard one. "Mike was there too. It was lovely." "I'm sure it was." Jennifer's smile sharpened. "Well, if you need any help navigating the school pickup situation, just let me know. It can be tricky for people who aren't used to children." The implication was clear. You're an outsider, and we all know it. Isabella had dealt with far more aggressive challenges in boardrooms, but something about this suburban passive aggression made her want to respond in kind. "I appreciate that," she said smoothly, "though I imagine it's fairly straightforward. You wait, they come out, you take them home. Not exactly quantum physics." Jennifer's smile froze. "Of course. Well, enjoy your ice cream." She walked away, and Isabella looked down to find both twins grinning up at her. "Mrs. Morrison is nosy," Maya whispered loudly. "Daddy says she needs a hobby." "Your daddy is very diplomatic," Isabella observed. "Come on, let's get you that ice cream before I change my mind." They walked to a small ice cream shop 3 blocks from the school, the twins chattering about their day while Isabella tried to keep up with the rapid-fire shifts in topic. Math was boring, but recess was great, except that Tommy had pushed Maya, but then apologized, so it was fine, and there was a field trip coming up to the aquarium, but they needed permission slips signed, and did Isabella know that seahorses could be pregnant? Because Lily had learned that today and thought it was weird. "Very weird," Isabella agreed, holding the door open for them. "What flavor do you want?" "Chocolate," they chorused, because apparently 7-year-olds were nothing if not predictable. Isabella ordered chocolate cones for them and a small coffee for herself, and they settled into a booth by the window. The twins attacked their ice cream with the single-minded focus of children who'd been promised a treat, and Isabella found herself watching them with something that felt dangerously close to affection. "Can I ask you something?" Lily said suddenly, looking up with those honey-colored eyes that saw too much. "Sure." "Are you Daddy's girlfriend?" Isabella nearly choked on her coffee. "What makes you ask that?" "He smiles at his phone a lot now," Maya said, "and he hums when he's cooking breakfast. He never used to do that." "Also, he bought new clothes," Lily added. "Not fancy clothes, but not old clothes. Uncle Mike said it was suspicious." "Uncle Mike needs to mind his own business," Isabella muttered. "So are you," Maya pressed. "His girlfriend." Isabella considered her options. She could deflect, could give them some non-answer that would satisfy their curiosity without committing to anything. But these were Ethan's daughters, and they deserved honesty, or at least as much honesty as she could give. "I don't know yet," she said finally. "We're figuring it out." Is that okay with you? The twins exchanged one of their telepathic looks, having an entire conversation without words. Then they turned back to Isabella in unison. It's okay, Lily said seriously. We like you. But if you hurt Daddy, we'll be very mad, Maya added, equally serious. That's fair, Isabella said. And if I do hurt him, which I really hope I don't, you have my permission to be as mad as you want. Can we yell? Lily asked. You can yell. Can we tell everyone at school you're mean? Maya asked. That seems reasonable. Can we put a curse on you? Lily asked, and Isabella had to fight back a smile. Where would you even learn to put a curse on someone? We have a book, Maya said darkly, from the library. Well, let's hope it doesn't come to that, Isabella said. How's your ice cream? They launched into an enthusiastic review of the ice cream's qualities, crisis apparently averted, and Isabella breathed a silent sigh of relief. Her phone buzzed with a text from Ethan. Sorry I'm running late. Meeting went long. How are the girls? She snapped a quick picture of the twins with their ice cream-covered faces and sent it to him. Currently interrogating me about our relationship status while eating chocolate. Your daughters are terrifying, I know. They get it from their mother. Are you okay? Surprisingly, yes. They've threatened to curse me if I hurt you, which I think is fair. They have a book? Apparently from the library. I'm going to have a talk with the librarian. Isabella smiled and pocketed her phone. By the time they finished their ice cream and made it back to Ethan's house, her fingers were numb despite her gloves, and the twins were singing some complicated song they'd learned in music class that involved a lot of hand motions. Do you want to come in? Maya asked as Isabella unlocked the door with the key Ethan had given her. Daddy will be home soon. Isabella checked her watch. She had a conference call in an hour, documents to review, 1,000 things that should take priority. But the house was warm, and the twins were looking at her with hopeful faces, and she found herself nodding. For a little while. They settled in the living room, where the twins immediately pulled out homework while Isabella sat on the couch, trying not to feel like she was playing house. This was dangerous territory, getting too comfortable, too involved, too attached. She should maintain boundaries, keep some distance, protect herself and them from the inevitable complications. Instead, she helped Lily with her math homework and listened to Maya read aloud from a book about dolphins. And when Ethan finally came home at 5:30, looking tired and windblown and happy to see her there, Isabella realized she was in far deeper than she'd intended. You stayed, he said, dropping his messenger bag by the door. They're very persuasive, Isabella said. Also, Lily needed help with fractions. I hate fractions, Lily announced from the floor, where she was sprawled on her stomach with her math book. Everyone hates fractions, Ethan agreed. Thank you for picking them up. I owe you one. You owe me ice cream money, Isabella corrected. They conned me into it. We didn't con her, Maya protested. We just asked very nicely. Same thing, Ethan said, but he was smiling. He looked at Isabella, and something passed between them, an understanding, a connection, a recognition of what this moment meant. Her, in his house, helping with his daughter's homework, like it was the most natural thing in the world. It terrified her. It also felt exactly right. That night, after Isabella had left for her conference call and the girls were in bed, Ethan called her. I've been thinking, he said without preamble. Dangerous habit. I'm serious. This thing we're doing, we need to talk about it. Actually talk about it, not just keep dancing around it. Isabella's stomach tightened. Okay, talk. I like you, Ethan said bluntly. A lot. More than I've liked anyone since Sarah. The girls adore you, which is both great and terrifying because if this doesn't work out, they're going to be devastated. And I'm terrified that I'm setting all of us up for heartbreak because our lives don't match, Isabella. Not even a little bit. I know they don't match. Do you? Because I don't think you really understand what you'd be signing up for. My life is chaos. It's soccer practice and school plays and emergency room visits when one of them falls off the monkey bars. It's living paycheck to paycheck and worrying about college funds and buying clothes from Target. It's not fancy dinners and business trips and the kind of life you're used to. I don't want the life I'm used to, Isabella said quietly. That's the whole point. What do you want? It was such a simple question, but Isabella found herself unable to answer it immediately. What did she want? She'd spent so long knowing exactly what she wanted professionally that she'd never really examined what she wanted personally. I want to feel like I matter to someone, she said finally, not for what I can do for them or what I can give them, but just for who I am. I want to come home to something other than silence. I want to build something that isn't measured in quarterly returns. I want... She stopped, her voice catching. I want what you have with your daughters. That unconditional love, that sense of belonging. I want to stop being alone. Ethan was quiet for a long moment. That's honest. You asked for honest. I did, he agreed. Okay, here's my honest. I'm scared that you're going to realize this isn't what you want. That the novelty will wear off and you'll go back to your real life and we'll just be this weird interlude you had once. I'm scared that my daughters will get attached and you'll leave and they'll lose someone else they care about. And I'm scared that I'm already falling for you and there's nothing I can do to stop it. Isabella felt tears prick her eyes. I'm scared too. I'm scared I'll screw this up because I don't know how to not control everything. I'm scared you'll realize I'm too damaged, too difficult, too much. I'm scared that I'll disappoint the girls because I don't know how to be what they need. But I'm willing to try, Ethan, if you are. I am, he said immediately. I'm terrified, but I'm willing. Then we'll be terrified together. That seems to be our thing. They talked for another hour, hammering out the logistics of what they were attempting. They'd take it slow, not rush into anything. They'd be honest with each other about their feelings and their fears. They'd protect the girls by not making any big changes until they were sure this was real and lasting. They'd try to bridge the gap between their worlds without forcing either of them to give up who they were. It all sounded reasonable and mature and well thought out. It lasted approximately 3 weeks. The unraveling started with something small, a business dinner Isabella had to attend that fell on the same night as Maya's school play. Isabella had committed to the dinner months ago, a gathering of investors that could make or break her Malaysia expansion. But Maya was playing a tree in the second-grade production of The Environment Needs Us, and she'd been practicing her one line for weeks. I can record it, Ethan offered when Isabella explained the conflict. She'll understand. But Maya didn't understand. She cried, great heaving sobs that broke Isabella's heart through the phone. And even though Ethan said all the right things about Isabella having important work, Isabella could hear the disappointment in his voice, too. She went to the dinner. She smiled and networked and closed a deal that added another $50 million to her bottom line, and she felt like the worst person in the world. When she got home at 11 p.m., there was a video message from Ethan, Maya as a tree, standing stage left, delivering her line with perfect enunciation. Trees make oxygen for everyone. The pride on her face was unmistakable, and so was the quick scan she did of the audience afterward, looking for someone who wasn't there. Isabella watched the video 3 times and then called Ethan, even though it was late. I'm sorry, she said when he answered. You don't have to apologize. You had work. I should have been there. Isabella, no, I should have been there. That dinner could have been rescheduled. The deal wasn't going anywhere. I prioritized wrong and I hurt her and I'm sorry. Ethan sighed. She'll be okay. Kids are resilient. That's not the point. The point is that I don't know how to do this, how to balance everything, how to be present for the things that matter when my whole life has been about work coming first. You're learning, Ethan said gently. You don't have to be perfect at this. But what if I can't learn? What if this is just who I am, someone who always chooses work, who can't put people first, who disappoints everyone eventually? Then we'll figure it out together, Ethan said. But you can't catastrophize every mistake. You missed one play. It's not the end of the world. Isabella wanted to believe him, but the guilt sat heavy in her chest. The second incident came 2 weeks later when Ethan's consulting job fell through at the last minute. The client went with a bigger firm, and he casually mentioned that money might be tight for a few months. How tight? Isabella asked. Tight enough that I might need to pull the girls from soccer, Ethan admitted. The league fees are due, and I just don't have it right now. Isabella's immediate instinct was to write a check, to solve the problem the way she solved everything, with money. But she'd learned enough by now to know that Ethan's pride was a real thing, something that couldn't be dismissed or minimized. What if I... She started carefully. No, Ethan interrupted. Whatever you're about to offer, no. You don't even know what I was going to say. You were going to offer money. The answer is no. Ethan, I have money. More money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. Letting me help with soccer fees wouldn't even register as an expense. It would register to me, Ethan said, his voice tight. I don't need you to solve my problems with your checkbook. I'm not trying to solve your problems. I'm trying to help people I care about. By making me feel like a charity case? By highlighting how different our lives are? No, thank you. They'd fought about it for hours, both of them saying things they half meant and half regretted, until finally Ethan had hung up and Isabella had thrown her phone across her bedroom in frustration. Mike had called her the next day. He's an idiot, Mike said without preamble. His pride is wounded and he's taking it out on you. He's not an idiot. He's protecting himself. Same thing sometimes. Look, I've known Ethan for 15 years. He's had to fight for everything he has. And taking help, especially from someone he cares about, makes him feel weak. It's not about you. It feels like it's about me. No. But it's about him and his issues with Sarah's death, and feeling like he should be able to provide for his kids without help. You're just the one standing in the blast radius. So what do I do? Give him space, let him cool down, then try again, but smaller. Don't offer to pay for everything, offer to split it. Don't make it about you having money. Make it about you wanting to be part of their lives. And this is how you can help. Isabella had taken Mike's advice, had given Ethan 3 days, and then had texted him a simple message. What if we split the soccer fees? Not as charity, but as someone who wants to see the girls play and is willing to invest in their athletic future, even if that future involves scoring on their own goal? Ethan had responded 6 hours later. That might be acceptable. They'd worked it out, awkwardly but honestly, and the twins had stayed in soccer. But the fight had exposed the fault lines in their relationship, the places where their different worlds created friction that couldn't be smoothed over with good intentions. March came, and with it a business trip Isabella couldn't avoid. A week in Singapore for negotiations that required her physical presence. She'd told Ethan about it apologetically, had seen his careful neutrality as he'd processed the information. A week is a long time, he'd said. I know. The girls will miss you. I'll miss them too. Will you? There was something in his voice, a challenge, or maybe just a fear. Or will you get on that plane and realize how much easier life is without all this chaos? That's not fair. Isn't it? Ethan had asked. You've got 1 foot in and 1 foot out, Isabella. I can feel it. You're here, but you're also holding back, keeping your exit strategy ready, just in case this doesn't work out. I'm trying my best. I know you are, but I don't know if your best is compatible with what we need. The conversation had ended badly, with both of them frustrated and hurt, and Isabella had gotten on the plane to Singapore feeling like everything was falling apart. She'd been gone 3 days when Ethan called at 2 a.m. Singapore time. Lily's in the hospital, he said, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. Appendicitis. They're taking her into surgery in an hour. Isabella sat up in her hotel bed, her heart racing. Is she okay? She's scared. She keeps asking for you. I'm coming home. Isabella, you're in Singapore. You can't just... I'm coming home, Isabella repeated, already pulling up flight options on her phone. I'll be on the next plane. Tell her I'm coming. She'd made it back to Boston in 23 hours, leaving the Singapore negotiations unfinished, leaving her business partners confused and her assistant scrambling to reschedule everything. She'd gone straight from the airport to the hospital, still in the clothes she'd worn on the plane, and found Ethan in the surgical waiting room looking like he'd aged 10 years. She's still in surgery, he said when he saw her. Routine appendectomy, but she's so small, and they said there were complications with the anesthesia, and... His voice broke. Isabella pulled him into her arms, this man who'd been so strong for so long, and let him fall apart. They stood there in the waiting room, holding each other while strangers moved around them, and Isabella realized with perfect clarity that she wasn't holding back anymore. She was all in. When Lily came out of surgery, groggy but okay, the first thing she said was, "You came back." "Of course I came back," Isabella said, stroking her hair. "You asked for me. I'll always come when you need me." "But you were in Singapore," Lily said, her words slurring slightly from the medication. That's really far away. Not too far, Isabella said firmly. Never too far. Ethan watched this exchange from the other side of the bed, and when their eyes met over Lily's head, Isabella saw something shift in his expression, saw the walls he'd been keeping up start to crack. That night, after Lily had fallen asleep and Maya had been picked up by Mike, Isabella and Ethan sat in the uncomfortable hospital chairs and finally had the conversation they'd been avoiding. I was wrong, Ethan said quietly, about you having one foot out. You came back from Singapore. You left a major business deal to sit in a hospital room with us. There was never a question, Isabella said. The moment you called, I knew I was coming home. The business can wait. You can't. I'm sorry I doubted you. I'm sorry I gave you reasons to doubt me. Missing Maya's play, fighting about money, always having one more work thing that came first. I can see how it looked. You're changing, though, Ethan observed. I've watched it happen. You're learning to let work be just work instead of your whole identity. It's hard, Isabella admitted. Terrifying, actually. I've built my entire life around my company. If I'm not Isabella Grant, CEO, I don't know who I am. You're Isabella, Ethan said simply. The woman who helps with homework and buys ice cream and comes back from Singapore because a 7-year-old needed her. That's who you are. The rest is just what you do. Isabella felt tears spill over, the exhaustion and emotion of the past 24 hours finally catching up with her. I want this to work. I want us to work, but I'm scared I'm going to screw it up. Then we'll deal with it when you do, Ethan said. I'm not expecting perfection, Isabella. I'm just expecting you to keep trying, to keep showing up, to keep choosing us, even when it's hard. I can do that. I know you can. You just proved it. They sat there as the hospital settled into its nighttime rhythm, holding hands across the divide between their chairs, and Isabella thought about all the ways love demanded change, how it required you to examine every assumption you'd made about yourself and decide what was essential and what was just armor you'd put on to keep from getting hurt. She'd spent so long being invulnerable, being untouchable, being the woman who needed nothing and no one. And now here she was, vulnerable and touched and needed, and it was the most terrifying thing she'd ever done. It was also the most real. When Lily was released 2 days later, Isabella took a week off work, actual time off, where she turned off her laptop and silenced her phone and focused entirely on the Cole family. She helped Ethan care for Lily, who milked her recovery for all it was worth. She played board games with Maya, who was feeling neglected and needed attention. She cooked meals that were mostly edible and helped with homework and read bedtime stories. She lived the life she'd never imagined wanting and found it suited her better than she'd expected. On the last night of her week off, after the girls were asleep, Ethan found her in the kitchen, staring at the refrigerator covered in the twins' artwork. "Penny for your thoughts," he said. "I was just thinking," Isabella said slowly, "about what you said in the hospital. About me being Isabella, not just the CEO. I think I'm starting to understand what that means." "Yeah?" "Yeah. It means I can have this," she gestured around the kitchen at the lived-in chaos of it, "and still have my company. They don't have to be mutually exclusive. I just have to stop treating work like the only thing that defines me." "That's very evolved of you," Ethan said with a slight smile. "Don't get too impressed. I'll probably backslide next week when I go back to the office." "Probably," Ethan agreed, "but you'll catch yourself. And we'll be here to remind you if you don't." He crossed the kitchen and pulled her into his arms, and Isabella let herself lean into him, let herself take comfort instead of always being the strong one. "I love you," she said into his shoulder, surprising both of them. "I didn't mean to. I tried not to. But I do." Ethan pulled back enough to look at her, his expression tender and terrified and hopeful all at once. "I love you too. Have for a while now. I was just waiting for you to catch up." They kissed there in his cluttered kitchen, surrounded by evidence of the messy, complicated, beautiful life they were building together, and Isabella understood finally that this was what she'd been missing. Not perfection, not control, not success measured in dollars and deals. Just this. Just love. Just belonging. Just the courage to keep choosing people over profit, connection over control, vulnerability over safety. It was enough. It was everything. The spring that followed Lily's surgery brought changes that Isabella could never have predicted 6 months earlier. She'd started working from Ethan's house 2 days a week, setting up a makeshift office in the corner of his dining room where she took video calls while the twins did homework at the kitchen table. Her assistant had nearly fainted the first time Isabella had declined a meeting because it conflicted with Maya's soccer game. Her board members had looked at her like she'd grown a second head when she'd announced she was implementing strict work-hour boundaries. "You're different," her CFO had observed during a quarterly review in April. "Softer somehow, but also more focused." "I'm the same person," Isabella had protested. "No, you're not. You used to check your email during board meetings. Now you actually close your laptop at 5 p.m. It's unsettling." But it wasn't unsettling to Isabella. It felt like coming up for air after spending years underwater. The real test came in May, when Ethan sat her down one evening after the girls had gone to bed and said, "I need to talk to you about something." Isabella's stomach dropped. Those words, in her experience, never preceded good news. "Okay." "I got offered a job," Ethan said. "A big one. They're building a new children's hospital in Roxbury, the same community center project I told you about, remember? The one I missed because of Sarah. The lead architect reached out, said he remembered my work from years ago, wants me to join the team as structural lead." "Ethan, that's amazing," Isabella said, relief flooding through her. "Why do you look so worried?" "Because it's a full-time position. Real hours, real commitment. I'd have to put the girls in after-school care, change our whole routine, and the pay is good but not great, at least not compared to what I could make if I went back to corporate consulting. I don't know if it's the smart choice financially." Isabella studied his face, saw the longing there, the hunger for meaningful work that he'd been suppressing for years. "Do you want it?" "More than anything," Ethan admitted. "It's everything I used to love about the work. Building something that matters, something that will help kids, something I can point to and say I was part of that. But no buts," Isabella interrupted. "You want it, you should take it. It's not that simple. The girls will adjust. Kids are resilient, remember? You told me that. The money is irrelevant," Isabella said firmly. "You'll make enough to support your family, and that's what matters. This isn't about maximizing income. It's about you doing work that fulfills you." Ethan looked at her for a long moment. "You're going to offer to help financially, aren't you?" "I wasn't planning to," Isabella said honestly. "Unless you need it, in which case, yes, absolutely. But not as charity, as someone who wants to see you happy and knows that money is just a tool, not a scoreboard." "I'm trying to get better about that," Ethan said. "About accepting help without feeling like I'm failing." "How's that going?" "Terribly," he admitted with a rueful smile. "But I'm trying." He took the job. The girls did adjust, though not without complaints about the after-school program and how the snacks there weren't as good as the ones at home. Ethan threw himself into the work with an energy Isabella hadn't seen before, coming home tired but animated, talking about load calculations and innovative design solutions over dinner in a way that made the twins' eyes glaze over and Isabella's heart swell. This was who he was supposed to be. Not diminished, not sacrificing, but whole. The proposal came in June, though not in any way Isabella had imagined. They were at Marcello's, the same restaurant where they'd met 6 months earlier, celebrating the twins' last day of school. It had become their tradition, coming here whenever something significant happened, and Isabella loved the symmetry of it. Vincent seated them at the same booth where the girls had first dragged her, and Maya immediately started lobbying for breadsticks before they'd even looked at the menu. "Some things never change," Ethan observed, watching his daughters with fond exasperation. "Thank goodness," Isabella said. "I'd be worried if they suddenly developed patience." They ordered, they ate, they laughed at the twins' dramatic reenactment of their teacher's end-of-year speech. It was ordinary and perfect, exactly the kind of evening Isabella had learned to treasure. Then Lily said, apropos of nothing, "When are you going to ask Isabella to marry you, Daddy?" Ethan choked on his water. Isabella froze with her fork halfway to her mouth. Maya looked at her sister with an expression of exasperation. "We were supposed to wait until dessert," Maya hissed. "That was your plan." "I have my own plan," Lily retorted. "Girls," Ethan started, his face flushing red. What? Lily said innocently. You said you were going to do it soon. We just want to know when soon is. You told them? Isabella asked, finding her voice. I may have mentioned that I was thinking about it, Ethan said, shooting his daughters a look that promised future discussions about privacy and appropriate dinner conversation. I didn't realize they would stage an intervention. We're helping, Maya explained, because you're taking forever, and Isabella might get impatient and leave. I'm not going to leave, Isabella said, though her heart was hammering so hard she could barely hear her own voice. But you could, Lily pressed, if Daddy doesn't ask you to stay officially. Is that what marriage is? Isabella asked gently. Asking someone to stay officially? It's asking someone to be family forever, Maya said seriously. Like how Mommy is still our family even though she died because Daddy married her. So if Daddy marries you, you'll be our family forever too, even if something bad happens. The logic was childlike but devastating in its clarity. Isabella looked at Ethan, who had his head in his hands, clearly mortified but also fighting back laughter. I had a plan, he said, his voice muffled. There was going to be a romantic moment, probably at the public garden, maybe with flowers. It definitely wasn't going to involve my daughters ambushing us at an Italian restaurant. When have any of your plans actually worked out? Isabella asked, surprising herself with how calm she sounded, despite the fact that her entire future was apparently being decided over chicken parmesan. Fair point. Ethan lifted his head, and Isabella saw the resignation in his expression shift into something else. Determination, maybe, or just acceptance that nothing in his life had ever been conventional, so why should this be? Okay, you know what? Fine. We're doing this now. He slid out of the booth and, to Isabella's absolute shock, got down on one knee right there in the middle of the restaurant. Other diners started to notice, conversations trailing off as people turned to watch. Isabella Grant, Ethan said, loud enough for the whole restaurant to hear. I had a whole speech prepared. It was eloquent and romantic and probably would have made you cry. But my daughters have decided we're doing this now, and honestly, it's appropriate because nothing about us has been conventional from the start. Daddy, the ring, Maya whispered urgently. I don't have the ring on me, Ethan whispered back. It's at home, in my sock drawer. The sock drawer? Lily looked appalled. That's not romantic. Can I finish, please? Ethan said to his daughters, then looked back at Isabella, who was trying very hard not to laugh. Where was I? You were explaining how nothing about us is conventional, Isabella prompted. Right. We met because you got stood up and my daughters kidnapped you. We fell in love while you were learning how to be human, and I was learning how to accept help. We fought about money and time and all the ways our lives don't match. We've struggled and screwed up and somehow made it work anyway. And I love you. I love your intensity and your vulnerability and the way you eat ice cream at 2 in the morning when you're stressed. I love that you came back from Singapore for Lily, that you show up to soccer games even though the team is terrible, that you're willing to set up an office in my dining room instead of insisting I come to your world. You've made space for us in your life, and I want to make that permanent. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep next to you every night. I want to navigate the chaos of raising these two with you. I want to build a life that's ours, not mine or yours, but ours. So Isabella Grant, will you marry me? The restaurant had gone completely silent. Even the kitchen staff had stopped working to watch. Isabella looked at this man kneeling in front of her, at his daughters watching with barely contained excitement, at all these strangers witnessing this completely imperfect, utterly perfect moment. Yes, she said, and her voice broke on the word. Yes, I'll marry you. The restaurant erupted in applause. The twins shrieked and launched themselves at Isabella, nearly knocking her out of the booth. Ethan stood up, looking dazed and relieved and happier than Isabella had ever seen him. I really did have a better plan, he said as he helped her up so he could kiss her properly. This was perfect, Isabella assured him between kisses. This was exactly how it should have been. Vincent appeared with champagne for the adults and sparkling cider for the twins, courtesy of the house, and raised a toast to the newly engaged couple. Other diners came by their table to offer congratulations. The twins informed anyone who would listen that they had orchestrated the whole thing, which wasn't exactly true but close enough. In the midst of the celebration, Isabella caught sight of the window table where she'd sat alone 6 months ago, holding back tears, convinced she'd spend another Christmas alone. The memory felt like it belonged to a different person, a different life. "What are you thinking?" Ethan asked, following her gaze. "That I'm grateful," Isabella said simply. "That guy who stood me up, wherever he is, I hope he's happy. Because if he'd shown up that night, I never would have met you." "Everything happens for a reason?" Ethan asked skeptically. "I don't know about that," Isabella said. "But sometimes the worst things lead to the best things, if you're brave enough to stay open to the possibility." They stayed at the restaurant for another hour, celebrating with too much dessert and the kind of joy that felt bottomless. When they finally left, walking out into the warm June evening, the twins were practically vibrating with excitement. "Can we tell Uncle Mike?" Maya begged. "Can we call Grandma?" Lily added. "You can tell everyone," Ethan said. "But tomorrow, tonight, let's just be us." They walked back to Ethan's house. Isabella had long since stopped thinking of it as just his house and started thinking of it as home, and the girls fell asleep almost immediately, exhausted from excitement. Isabella and Ethan sat on the back porch, drinking wine and watching the fireflies emerge as darkness fell. "Are you sure about this?" Ethan asked quietly. "Really sure? Because once we do this, there's no going back." "I don't want to go back," Isabella said. "I want to go forward. With you, with the girls, with whatever comes next." "Even the hard parts?" "Especially the hard parts. The hard parts are what make it real." Ethan pulled a small velvet box from his pocket, and Isabella laughed. "You had it with you the whole time." "I've been carrying it around for 2 weeks," Ethan admitted, "waiting for the right moment. I just didn't expect the right moment to be orchestrated by 2 7-year-olds. He opened the box to reveal a simple platinum band with a single diamond, not ostentatious, not trying to compete with her wealth, just beautiful and real and exactly right. "It's perfect," Isabella said as he slipped it on her finger. "It's all I could afford." "That's not what I meant," Isabella said firmly. "I meant it's perfect because you chose it, because it represents us, because it's not trying to be anything other than what it is. Stop apologizing for not being rich, Ethan. I have enough money for both of us. What I didn't have was this: love, family, belonging. That's what you give me. That's what's valuable." They sat there in the gathering darkness, and Isabella felt the last of her walls come down. She was engaged. She was going to be a stepmother. She was going to merge her carefully controlled life with this beautiful chaos, and it was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. The wedding was planned for December, a full year after they'd met, because the twins insisted on the symmetry. Isabella hired a wedding planner who nearly quit when Isabella kept having opinions about everything, then realized the bride actually knew what she wanted and relaxed. They decided on a small ceremony at Marcello's, where Vincent had already started planning the menu with an enthusiasm that suggested he felt personally invested in their love story. The months between the engagement and the wedding were a study in compromise and adjustment. Isabella sold her Beacon Hill townhouse. Too big, too formal, too much a symbol of her old life, and they bought a house together in Cambridge. It was smaller than her old place but larger than Ethan's, with enough room for all of them and a proper home office for Isabella. The twins got to decorate their own rooms, a process that resulted in a lot of purple and a concerning amount of glow-in-the-dark stars. Mike had cried when Ethan told him about the engagement, actual tears streaming down his face as he'd grabbed them both in a bear hug and said, "About damn time." He'd immediately volunteered to be best man and had started planning a bachelor party that Ethan had already vetoed twice. Isabella's mother had been less enthusiastic when Isabella finally called to tell her. "A widower with twins," her mother had said, her tone making it clear what she thought of this development. "Isabella, really? What about children of your own?" "I'll have children," Isabella had said calmly. "They just happen to be 7 years old already and came with the package. I'm sorry if that disappoints you, but I'm not asking for your approval. I'm informing you of my decision." Her mother had hung up. They hadn't spoken since, and while it hurt, Isabella found she could live with it. She'd built a new family, one that chose her back. The girls had started calling her Bella shortly after the engagement. Not Mom, because that title belonged to Sarah and always would, but something that was uniquely theirs. Isabella loved it, loved the way it made her feel like she belonged to them as much as they were beginning to belong to her. She'd discovered she was terrible at braiding hair, but excellent at helping with science projects. She'd learned that Maya liked her pancakes with chocolate chips, while Lily preferred plain. She'd figured out that the best way to get them to clean their room was to turn it into a competition, and that the fastest way to diffuse a twin argument was to ask them both to explain the problem in detail until they forgot what they were fighting about. She'd learned, slowly and imperfectly, how to be part of a family. The children's hospital project that Ethan was working on had broken ground in September, and he'd brought the whole family to the ceremony. Isabella had watched him talk to reporters and city officials, had seen the pride in his face as he explained the innovative structural design, and had understood viscerally that this was what he was meant to do. Not consulting for money, not playing it safe, but building things that mattered. "I'm going to start a foundation," Isabella had announced one night in October, apropos of nothing. Ethan had looked up from the blueprints he was reviewing. What kind of foundation? For single parents trying to balance careers and childcare, scholarships, grants, support services. "I've been thinking about how you had to give up work you loved because you couldn't afford childcare and flexible hours. How many other people are in that same situation? How much talent is being wasted because our systems don't support parents?" "That's a big undertaking," Ethan had said carefully. "I have big resources," Isabella had countered, "and I finally understand what I want to do with them. Not just make more money, but actually help people. Build something that matters." She'd launched the Foundation for Working Families in November, funding it with $50 million of her own money and recruiting board members who actually understood the problems they were trying to solve. The press release had made national news, and suddenly Isabella was being invited to speak at conferences about work-life balance and corporate responsibility. "I've created a monster," Ethan had joked after Isabella's third speaking engagement in as many weeks. "You've created an advocate," Isabella had corrected. "There's a difference." December arrived with snow and anticipation. The twins had been fitted for matching dresses that they'd chosen themselves, red velvet, because some things were apparently non-negotiable. Mike had promised to behave during the ceremony, a promise no one believed. Isabella's assistant had arranged everything with military precision, while also fielding calls from Isabella's board members who still couldn't quite believe their CEO was getting married in a restaurant. The night before the wedding, Isabella had dinner with just Ethan and the girls at their new house. They'd ordered pizza because no one felt like cooking, and they'd eaten it sitting on the floor of the living room because their dining table was covered with wedding preparations. "Are you nervous?" Maya had asked, studying Isabella with those too perceptive eyes. "A little," Isabella had admitted. "Are you?" "Why would we be nervous?" Lily had asked. "Because your lives are going to change tomorrow. I'm going to officially be your stepmom. That's a big deal." The twins had exchanged one of their telepathic looks, then turned back to Isabella in unison. "You've been our Bella for months," Maya had said simply. "The wedding is just making it official for everyone else. We decided you were family on Christmas." Isabella had felt tears prick her eyes for approximately the 1,000th time since meeting this family. "I love you both so much." "We know," Lily had said matter-of-factly. "We love you too, even when you make us eat vegetables." "Especially when she makes you eat vegetables," Ethan had interjected. "Someone has to be the responsible one." That night, lying in bed next to Ethan in the house they now shared, Isabella had thought about the journey that had brought her here. About the woman she'd been a year ago, sitting alone in a restaurant, believing that success and loneliness were the price of ambition. About all the walls she'd built and then slowly, painfully taken down. "What are you thinking?" Ethan had asked, pulling her closer. "That I almost missed this," Isabella had said quietly. "If your daughters hadn't been brave enough to talk to a stranger, if you hadn't been generous enough to invite me to dinner, if I hadn't been desperate enough to say yes, I almost missed the best thing that ever happened to me." "But you didn't miss it," Ethan had said. "You were brave enough to stay open to the possibility. That's what matters." The wedding itself was perfect in all the ways that mattered, and imperfect in all the ways that made it real. Vincent cried during the ceremony. Mike's toast was simultaneously heartfelt and inappropriate. The twins served as flower girls and took their duties so seriously that they critiqued every guest's arrival for proper reverence. Isabella's assistant had documented everything with professional precision while also crying into her champagne. Ethan had written his own vows, and when he spoke them, his voice had broken with emotion. Isabella, you came into our lives like a storm, unexpected, powerful, impossible to ignore. You challenged me to be better, to want more, to believe that I deserved both professional fulfillment and personal happiness. You loved my daughters before you loved me, which is exactly as it should be. You've shown me that strength and vulnerability aren't opposites, that success and family aren't mutually exclusive, that love is about choosing someone every day, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. I promise to choose you every day for the rest of my life. I promise to support your dreams even when they scare me. I promise to share the burden of this beautiful chaos we're building together. I promise to love you with everything I have for as long as I live. Isabella had written her vows on note cards that she'd reviewed obsessively for weeks, but when the moment came, she'd set them aside and spoken from her heart. Ethan, a year ago I was successful and accomplished and desperately lonely. I'd built an empire but lived in a fortress, surrounded by wealth but starving for connection. Then two little girls decided I looked sad, and their father decided to trust them, and everything changed. You taught me that love isn't about grand gestures or expensive gifts. It's about showing up day after day, even when it's inconvenient. It's about choosing people over profit, connection over control, vulnerability over safety. You've given me a family, a home, a reason to close my laptop at 5 p.m. and mean it. I promise to honor the memory of Sarah by loving the daughter she gave you with everything I have. I promise to keep showing up, keep choosing you, keep building this life with you. I promise to be brave enough to stay, even when I'm scared. Especially when I'm scared, because you're worth it. This is worth it. We are worth it. There hadn't been a dry eye in the restaurant. They'd exchanged rings. Isabella's engagement ring joined by a matching wedding band, Ethan's a simple platinum band that matched hers. They'd kissed while everyone applauded, and the twins had cheered so loudly that several guests had covered their ears. The reception had lasted until midnight, with dancing and terrible karaoke and the kind of joy that filled every corner of the room. Isabella had danced with Ethan, with Mike, with each of the twins in turn. She'd cut the cake and thrown the bouquet and done all the traditional things, and had meant every moment of it. Near the end of the night, she'd found herself standing at the window table, the same one where she'd sat alone exactly 1 year earlier, and Ethan had come to stand beside her. "What are you thinking?" he'd asked, slipping his arm around her waist. "That a year ago I sat right here and thought my life was over," Isabella had said. "I thought being stood up on Christmas Eve was the worst thing that could happen. I had no idea it was actually the best thing, that it was the beginning of everything." "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if he'd shown up?" Ethan had asked. "If you'd gone on that date instead of having dinner with us?" "Never," Isabella had said honestly, "because this is exactly where I'm supposed to be. With you, with the girls, with this family we're building. This is home." The honeymoon was a week in the Caribbean, just the two of them, while the twins stayed with Mike. It was Isabella's first real vacation in a decade, and she'd been terrible at it for the first 2 days, constantly checking her phone and worrying about work until Ethan had literally hidden her laptop. "You're allowed to rest," he told her. "The company won't collapse without you for a week." "How do you know?" "Because you've built it well enough that it doesn't need you hovering every second. That's the sign of a good leader, building systems that work without constant oversight." By day 3, Isabella had finally relaxed, had remembered how to just exist without optimizing every moment. They'd spent lazy days on the beach, evenings trying local restaurants, nights talking about their future. They'd discussed whether they wanted more children, decided they were open to the possibility but happy with their family as it was. They'd talked about Ethan's work, about Isabella's foundation, about how they'd navigate the ongoing challenge of balancing careers and family. "I used to think I had to choose," Isabella had said one night as they'd walked along the beach. "Career or family, success or happiness. I thought they were mutually exclusive. And now? Now I know they're not. They're just hard to balance. But hard doesn't mean impossible. It just means you have to keep trying, keep adjusting, keep communicating." "Very wise," Ethan had said. "Where'd you learn that?" from a structural engineer who taught me that the strongest buildings aren't the rigid ones. They're the ones with enough flexibility to withstand pressure without breaking. Ethan had laughed. I'm not sure that metaphor works the way you think it does. It works perfectly, Isabella had insisted. We're building something here. A marriage, a family, a life. And the foundation is strong because we're not trying to be perfect. We're just trying to be honest and flexible and brave enough to keep choosing each other. When they'd returned from their honeymoon, the twins had greeted them at the airport with handmade welcome home signs and enough energy to power a small city. Mike had looked exhausted but happy and had immediately handed over the girls with obvious relief. They're angels, he'd said. Absolute angels. Never let them stay with me again. That bad? Ethan had asked, trying not to laugh. They convinced me to let them dye my bathroom pink, Mike had said. Pink. I run a construction company. Do you know what my guys are going to say when they see my pink bathroom? That you're secure in your masculinity? Isabella had suggested. That I'm a pushover who got conned by two 7-year-olds, Mike had muttered, but he'd hugged them all goodbye with genuine affection. Life had settled into a new normal after that. Isabella had restructured her role at Grant Industries, hiring a COO to handle day-to-day operations while she focused on strategy and her foundation work. She'd faced pushback from board members who thought she was stepping back, but she'd stood firm. I'm not stepping back, she'd told them in a meeting that had become legendary in company lore. I'm stepping into a fuller version of leadership, one that acknowledges that I'm a whole person, not just a CEO. I have a family now, and they're my priority. If that makes me less valuable to this company, then perhaps this company doesn't deserve my continued leadership. But I don't think that's true. I think I'm actually more valuable now, more creative, more balanced, more capable of seeing the bigger picture. Take it or leave it. They'd taken it. The company's stock had actually risen after her announcement, with analysts praising her progressive approach to work-life balance. Ethan's hospital project had been completed the following September, and the whole family had attended the ribbon-cutting ceremony. Isabella had watched Ethan give interviews about the innovative structural design, had seen him pose for pictures with the children who would be treated there, and had felt overwhelming pride. That's my husband, she'd told anyone who would listen. He built that. The twins had started 3rd grade that fall, both of them thriving in ways that made Isabella's heart swell. Maya had joined the school science club and was conducting experiments that occasionally resulted in small explosions. Lily had made the select soccer team and was finally learning to score on the correct goal. They'd both adjusted to having Isabella as a permanent fixture in their lives, though they still tested boundaries and pushed back and occasionally told her she wasn't their real mom when they were angry. I know I'm not your real mom, Isabella had said the first time Lily had thrown that particular grenade during an argument about homework. But I'm your real stepmom, and I love you really, and that means you still have to finish your math problems. 2 years after the wedding, Isabella had been invited to give a TED Talk about redefining success. She'd stood on that stage in front of thousands of people and told her story, the loneliness, the stand-up date, the 2 little girls who'd changed everything. I used to measure my worth in dollars and deals, she'd said. I thought success meant having the biggest company, the most money, the most impressive achievements. And I was miserable. I was successful by every external measure and desperately unhappy. It took 2 7-year-olds and their widowed father to teach me that real wealth isn't measured in bank accounts. It's measured in relationships, in love, in moments of connection. It's measured in showing up to soccer games and helping with homework and choosing family over meetings. I still run a successful company. I still close deals and grow my business. But now I also have a life outside of work, and that doesn't make me less successful. It makes me more human, and that's what really matters. The talk had gone viral, been viewed millions of times, and spawned countless articles about work-life balance and redefining success. Isabella had been invited to speak at conferences around the world, had become an unlikely advocate for working parents and family-friendly business practices. But her favorite moments weren't the accolades or the speaking engagements. They were the ordinary ones. Tuesday night dinners with her family, weekend mornings sleeping in while the twins watched cartoons, date nights with Ethan where they tried new restaurants and argued about movies and held hands like teenagers. On their 3rd anniversary, they'd returned to Marcello's with the twins, now 9 years old and somehow even more opinionated than before. Vincent had seated them at the same booth, had brought them the same meals they'd ordered that first night, and had winked at Isabella when he'd set down her wine. "Every year you come back," he'd observed. "This makes me very happy." "It's our tradition," Maya had explained. "We come here for important things." "And what's important tonight?" Vincent had asked. "It's the anniversary of when Daddy proposed," Lily had said, "even though we're the ones who made him do it." "We helped," Maya had corrected. "There's a difference." After dinner, as they'd walked home through streets dusted with fresh snow, Isabella had found herself thinking about that first Christmas Eve, about the woman she'd been, sitting alone and heartbroken, convinced that her life was following the script she'd written for it. She'd been wrong. Her life had veered wildly off script, had taken turns she'd never anticipated, had brought her to places she'd never imagined. And it was so much better than anything she could have planned. "What are you thinking about?" Ethan had asked, taking her hand as they walked. "That I'm grateful," Isabella had said, "for everything. For the guy who stood me up, for your daughter's courage, for your willingness to take a risk on someone from a completely different world, for every argument we've had and every compromise we've made and every moment of this messy, complicated, beautiful life we've built." "That's very philosophical for 9 p.m. on a Tuesday," Ethan had observed. "I'm feeling philosophical," Isabella had said. "It's our anniversary. I'm allowed." Ahead of them, the twins had been conducting some elaborate game that involved jumping over cracks in the sidewalk and shrieking about lava. Behind them, the city lights of Boston glowed against the winter sky. And there, in the space between, walked Isabella Grant Cole and her husband, holding hands, building a life, choosing each other. Years would pass. The twins would grow up, would graduate high school and go to college and build lives of their own. There would be challenges and setbacks, moments of doubt and fear and pain. There would be times when Isabella would question her choices, when Ethan would struggle with the balance between work and family, when they would argue and hurt each other and have to find their way back. But they would always come back to this: the choice to stay, the courage to be vulnerable, the commitment to keep building something together even when it was hard. Because that's what love was. Not the fairy tale, not the perfect moment, not the grand gesture. Love was choosing someone every day. It was showing up even when you were tired, communicating even when you wanted to shut down, fighting for the relationship even when walking away would be easier. Love was two little girls brave enough to talk to a stranger. It was a father willing to trust them. It was a lonely woman saying yes to an unexpected invitation. It was all of them together, building something real. And on Christmas Eve, every year for the rest of their lives, the Cole Grant family would return to Marcello's. They would sit in the same booth, order the same breadsticks, and remember the night when everything changed. They would watch other families around them, some happy, some struggling, and Isabella would sometimes notice someone sitting alone, a man checking his watch, a woman fighting back tears, and she would remember what that felt like: the loneliness, the disappointment, the certainty that this was just how life was going to be. And she would catch Ethan's eye across the table, would see him noticing the same person, and they would share a smile. Because they both knew the truth. Sometimes the worst nights lead to the best mornings. Sometimes being stood up is the beginning of everything. Sometimes two 7-year-olds with more courage than sense can change the entire trajectory of your life. And sometimes, if you're very lucky and very brave, you get to build something with someone that's stronger than anything you could have built alone. That was wealth. That was success. That was love. And it was worth more than all the billions in the world.